The story begins with the protagonist Liu Yi, a player who never took games seriously. Because of this, he could only watch helplessly as his sister was murdered by an unknown person wielding a sword. The weight of guilt fell upon Liu Yi. As the older brother, he failed to protect her. Lost in thoughts trying to understand where he went wrong and what led to this tragic outcome, he didn't notice the silhouette of a man with a sword approaching from behind. In an instant, the blade pierced his body, causing him to bleed. While still conscious, a stranger picked him up and without hesitation threw him next to his sister's lifeless body. Stunned, Liu Yi refused to accept reality. If he had known their end would be like this, he would have taken the game seriously from the start. Since the death of their parents, they had been alone, and Liu Yi's greatest dream was to take care of his sister, ensuring she had a promising future. He was dedicated to the game called Yuan World, but for him, it was just a pastime. Little did he know that this virtual world would take control of reality, granting players the abilities of their characters, leading to a global collapse. Liu Yi watched helplessly as his sister died, while two nearby players laughed and discussed their next steps. Suddenly, something awakened within him. He rose with three fixed thoughts. First, he hated that world where the rules were changed so easily. Second, he despised himself for not taking the game seriously. And above all, he harbored a deep hatred for his sister's killer, who clearly had enjoyed killing her. With a swift motion, Liu Yi grabbed something from the ground and threw it at the killer's head, making him lose his balance. The enemy, dazed, touched his head, confused about what had happened and where the object had come from. Liu Yi, lying on the ground, watched everything with a satisfied smile, happy that he had at least resisted a little. However, his fate was already sealed. Without hesitation, the killer decapitated Liu Yi, saying he would never allow a level 1 weakling to challenge him. Something, however, was wrong. Liu Yi woke up in his bed at home. Outside, an announcement echoed through the streets. There were only 8 hours left until the opening of the game Yuan World. Liu Yi stood up abruptly, unable to believe what was happening, as he remembered perfectly being killed. Looking around, he didn't recognize where he was until he realized it was his old apartment where he had lived 3 years ago. Suddenly the door opened and a female voice echoed through the room. Liu Yi froze, unable to believe what he was seeing. In the hallway stood his sister holding a box containing the authorization for the game Yuan World. With a trembling voice, he asked what year it was. Liu Yun, surprised by the question, replied jokingly that it seemed like he had woken up in a bad mood and said it was the year 2030. That hit him hard. Liu Yi stood still, unable to believe what he was hearing. Quickly getting up, he ran to the window. With his mouth slightly open, he realized that he had returned exactly to the day Yuan World was activated for the first time. Without hesitation, he hugged his sister tightly and promised himself that this time he would not allow them to die. He would become the strongest player unless all of this was just a dream. It was July 27, 2030. The virtual reality game Yuan World was released, and on September 1st it took control of the world. All players received the abilities of their characters within the game. The marginalized and the lower classes of society all of a sudden acquired incredible powers. For the first time, they felt a strength they never imagined they could possess. Because of this, chaos ensued, and endless wars over money and power began. Our protagonist followed the path of a player who only explored the game world. This led him to a tragic fate. Due to his low level, he ended up dying in Yuan World. However, by some miracle, he had an unexpected stroke of luck. He was reborn and returned 3 years back in time to the exact moment when the game was about to be released. This time, he was determined to become the strongest. Mentally, he returned to reality and was surprised when his sister pushed him as he had unknowingly started hugging her. She was extremely embarrassed, thinking her brother was just bothering her. Scratching his head, he smiled awkwardly and said, surprised that he really seemed to be doing that. We jump forward 8 hours in time to the moment of the Yuan World launch. Our protagonist put on the virtual reality glasses and laid down on his bed. He knew there were only 34 days left before the game would dominate the world. If he could become the strongest player during this period, he and his sister wouldn't die. Upon entering the game, he appeared in the initial plaza where many players had already gathered. In the center, an administrator was about to demonstrate the power of a skill called strength. The first strike he delivered was simple, cutting a large rock in half. However, by concentrating his energy, he delivered another attack with a single movement, splitting the rock into two as if it were butter. The demonstration deeply shocked Liu Yi, who was watching with his mouth open. After the training session ended, the system transported our protagonist directly into the game. At the spawn point, several players were looking around in awe of this new world. However, Liu Yi had only one focus: to evolve as quickly as possible. He decided to choose the strength skill as it was considered the most mysterious and determined the difference between an ordinary player and a true warrior. Without wasting time, he headed for the training pavilion. In the world of Yuan World, there were no fixed combat classes, just divisions based on the weapons used. Knowing this, Liu Yi wanted to master a weapon as quickly as possible, as the foundation of power lay in the mastery of its use. Once he reached 100% proficiency with a weapon, he would have complete control over the strength skill. With this urgency, he hurried to the weapon pavilion, worried that all the training areas would be crowded. However, to his surprise, when he entered, he realized the place was completely empty. Liu Yi didn't mind. He was determined to achieve his goal. He went straight to the weapon rack and began his selection. The katana was his favorite weapon, so he decided to start with it. However, he knew he should test all the available options. After 5 intense hours of training, he was exhausted. Still, he managed to master the katana completely, making it his main weapon. Despite the fatigue, he knew there was no time to waste. Without hesitation, he grabbed a long sword and began a new training cycle, pushing himself to the maximum and ignoring his own limits. In the weapon pavilion, a couple was walking through the corridors, admiring how realistic everything around them seemed. Suddenly, the girl noticed a training pavilion behind the guy. Curious about the sounds coming from there, she asked what could be inside. The guy looked up, saw the sign above the entrance, and commented that it was probably a training space. Without hesitation, the girl peeked around the corner of the door. That's when she saw our protagonist training tirelessly with a sword, refining his strikes against a wooden dummy. She noticed that Liu Yi was the only one training in that area, which struck her as quite strange. The couple approached the weapon rack but didn't pick any weapons. Instead, they wanted to understand how the training worked. They watched for a few minutes, then threw the weapons on the ground, saying that it was a boring activity reserved for losers. As they left, the guy explained that the training pavilion was only for increasing weapon proficiency without offering other advantages. He further emphasized that to reach 100% proficiency, at least 10,000 strikes were necessary. The girl suggested that they leave and use that time to level up. The guy agreed immediately. Before leaving, the girl took one last look at Liu Yi. For some reason, he stuck in her memory. Liu Yi, however, didn't even notice that anyone had passed by. He kept striking endlessly, showing no intention of resting. On the first day, he mastered the katana and the halberd completely, but his much-anticipated special skill didn't appear. On the second day, he reached mastery in using the spear, axe, shield, and hammer. Still, this power didn't awaken. On the third day, while other players had already reached levels 10 to 20, Liu Yi was still at level 1, and his strength remained hidden. For a moment, he considered leveling up before continuing his training, but he quickly dismissed the thought. If he wanted to become the strongest player, he needed to obtain his skill at all costs. Nothing would stop him. Once again, the scene shifts to the street near the training pavilion. The same couple was walking by, discussing the fact that a player had died. The punishment in Yuan World was harsh. Upon dying, the player lost all experience levels. In the middle of their conversation, the girl once again saw Liu Yi and was incredibly surprised. He was still training. The guy beside her was also shocked. He said there were far more exciting ways to play, much better than spending days training non-stop. The girl, intrigued, couldn't understand why Liu Yi kept at it. Her friend suggested that maybe he knew some hidden secret. Excited, he thought of trying to master a weapon as well. However, the girl interrupted his idea. She stated that it was pointless, as Liu Yi had been training for 3 whole days and nothing had changed. While other players reached level 20, he was still only improving his weapon skills. He wouldn't have a chance to win this way. Liu Yi, however, completely ignored the couple. He had a goal and he wouldn't waste time on distractions. The girl grew irritated by his obsession. She said Liu Yi seemed like a game addict, and even if he did become the strongest fighter, she would never try weapon training. For her, time would be better spent leveling up. Losing patience to stay there any longer, she grabbed her friend's arm and insisted they leave. They needed to gain more experience as quickly as possible. Days later, our protagonist received an unexpected notification. He had mastered 18 types of weapons, and as a result, earned the title of Master Armor. Now he was able to use the skills and characteristics of the other 17 weapons with any primary weapon of his choice. With a whip in his hands, he was exhausted and remained motionless. Processing the message in front of his eyes, he couldn't understand what was happening. He had perfected all possible bladed weapons, but his long-awaited special skill never manifested. Because of this, he decided to discard the bladed weapons. Maybe his true talent lay in firearms. Without wasting any time, he headed to the firearms pavilion. As he walked, he reflected on something curious. In his previous life, he had never encountered a player who used power with firearms. Upon entering the pavilion, a magnificent hall was revealed before him. There was an immense variety of weapons displayed on metal racks. Without hesitation, Liu Yi chose a pistol. The days were passing quickly. More than 5 days had passed, and he was sure that the other players had already reached level 30. Meanwhile, he was still at level 1. Looking at the vast selection of weapons, Liu Yi felt a tightness in his chest. There were so many options, and because of this, Yuan World could take over the world before he mastered them all. For a moment, he wondered if it was worth continuing. But then, the memory of his sister's death came flooding back. That level 20 player who killed her, blood boiled in his veins. He had no choice. He couldn't turn back. Without power, he would never become the strongest player. Taking a deep breath, he raised the pistol and began his training. Even if his fate was to die again, he would never give up. Meanwhile, in the training pavilion, the girl who had once mocked Liu Yi's dedication decided to return to check on his progress. However, when she looked inside, she found no one. Surprised, she thought he had given up and left never to return. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the area. The deafening sound froze her in place. What was that? Instinctively, she followed the noise and climbed the stairs toward the firearms pavilion. Peering around the corner of the door, she was stunned. Liu Yi had stopped shooting. The reason he had completely destroyed the training target. Around him, a strange greenish aura flickered, as if his very existence was shifting. The girl covered her mouth with her hands, stifling a scream. Her eyes reflected pure horror. What the hell was happening to him? Liu Yi, for his part, remained frozen. He wasn't looking at anything, as if lost in the void. But in truth, he was reading the notification he had waited for so long. The message said, "Congratulations, you have reached 100% mastery with a pistol. As a reward, you have acquired a new skill." A shiver ran down Liu Yi's body. He had finally received his power. Now for the first time, he felt prepared for the impending disaster. A subtle laugh escaped his lips. The next step was clear. Level up and catch up with the other players. His statistics were basic, all at 5. The only exception was his special endurance, which had only 1 point. Additionally, a new icon for passive skills appeared, but it was empty. Heading for the exit, Liu Yi was ready to start leveling up. However, as he reached the door, he noticed a girl standing in the hallway. She tried to act casually, looking away, and whistling a melody, pretending not to have seen anything. Liu Yi, however, didn't waste time wondering if she had seen something or not. He simply walked past her as if she wasn't there. The girl in turn felt strangely embarrassed. A feeling of irritation took over her, not understanding why she felt so uncomfortable. She wanted to ask what had happened inside the pavilion, and wanted to understand what that strange aura around Liu Yi was. But she hesitated. In the end, she remained behind. Along the way, Liu Yi overheard rumors about Yuan World. The most relevant information was that the game had reached 10 million online players. This only confirmed his concern. Time was passing far too quickly. Arriving at the store, Liu Yi chose his equipment. He purchased a low-level pistol called the White Dragon, costing 500 coins. He also bought a box with 300 regular bullets for 300 coins and a low-level dagger that cost him 200 coins. In total, he spent 1,000 coins on his new acquisitions. Upon leaving the store, he felt a slight sense of discouragement. The prices were way too high, and the fact that the in-game currency had the same value as real money made everything even more expensive. To him, the company behind Yuan World had overdone it with the item prices. Still, he was satisfied with his new weapons. As he examined the dagger, an idea struck him. Without hesitation, he activated his special skill, Master Armor. This skill allowed him to surpass the limitations of weapons and apply the powers of one weapon to another. The first real test of his new power was about to begin. Determined to test his abilities, Liu Yi headed to the Mirror Kingdom Game Company. This place allowed players to create a mirror copy of themselves to fight against it. The rules were simple. If a player managed to defeat their copy, they would receive extra money and experience. However, there were 2 conditions to participate. The player needed to be at least 5 levels below their copy and also pay 10% of their gold to enter the fight. For Liu Yi, these conditions were not a problem. In fact, it was the perfect scenario for him. He was still at level 1, but now he had real power. While walking through the Mirror Kingdom Hall, a shout of frustration echoed throughout the area. 2 players had just respawned, complaining about the extreme difficulty of the mirrored copies. It seemed they had lost everything they had worked for. Nearby, 2 other players were watching the scene with irony. They mocked the defeated players, and when they noticed Liu Yi, they turned their attention to him. One of them, noticing the pistol hanging from the boy's waist, laughed in disdain. To him, it was the worst possible weapon choice in the game. The other player also showed contempt. He was convinced that Liu Yi was nothing more than an inexperienced rookie deluded into thinking he could win with such inferior equipment. Liu Yi remained silent, simply observing the players. They had no idea what he was capable of now. After confirming his decision, Liu Yi mentally prepared himself for his first battle in the Mirror Kingdom. He knew that due to his lack of experience, the odds were against him. However, he also understood that he had no choice but to fight. He accessed the system menu to familiarize himself with the interface. After navigating for a moment, another notification appeared, asking for confirmation to face a mirror player. Despite his fear, Liu Yi confirmed his participation, fully aware of the consequences. The system then displayed a notification requesting confirmation of the participation fee. It amounted to 100 coins. After accepting, a second notification appeared, reminding him that once inside the Mirror Kingdom, players could not leave until the battle was completed. A few moments later, Liu Yi found himself transported to the arena. His opponent was a player ready for combat. The countdown began and the battle was about to start in 10 seconds. When the countdown reached 5 seconds, Liu Yi's nerves took over. He had never fought anyone voluntarily, and the fear of confrontation was overwhelming. His leg began to shake, involuntarily distracting him even more. Trying to calm himself, he patted his leg. However, this distraction caused him to miss the start of the battle. His opponent, wielding a red sword, immediately launched an attack. Liu Yi thought everything was lost before it even began. But to his surprise, he managed to dodge the first strike and attempted to shoot at the enemy. Unfortunately, all of his shots missed, and as he lost his balance, he nearly fell. The enemy kept advancing and, taking advantage of Liu Yi's instability, easily disarmed him. Now, without weapons, Liu Yi had to face the red sword using only his physical strength. The opponent seemed certain of his victory. Still, in that moment of doubt, Liu Yi realized that he couldn't give up. This was his second chance at life, and he wasn't going to waste it. He activated his master archer skill, which allowed him to modify the properties of the blade. With the increased strength of the blade, Liu Yi was able to stop the opponent's sword strike with ease. The enhanced power of the blade allowed him to counterattack with a force he didn't know he had. With skill and precision, he cut the enemy's sword, disabling it, and then defeated him swiftly. Despite the victory, Liu Yi was still trembling with nerves. His hands were shaking and his breathing was heavy, a reaction he couldn't control. He felt a wave of frustration for not being able to calm down after the victory. Meanwhile, a few minutes earlier, 2 other players were walking through the arena. They were discussing their plans to gather members for their teams. They talked about how difficult it had become to win battles in the Mirror Kingdom, especially with the large clans competing against smaller teams. As Liu Yi celebrated his victory, the 2 players observing him were shocked by the result. They couldn't believe that a level 1 player with minimal equipment had managed to defeat an opponent 5 levels higher. In reality, the 2 players weren't looking for allies. Instead, they were betting money on other players, hoping to profit. One of them quickly checked the odds of the bets on a site called Backstage Garden, eager to see how much they would earn from their wagers. The other, on the other hand, was carefully analyzing Liu Yi's movements. He was intrigued by how a player of such a low level could defeat their opponent. Liu Yi watched his opponent's strikes closely as the countdown to the start of the battle continued. The guy with green hair observed every move Liu Yi made, saying that the answer had arrived. Meanwhile, the second player commented that it was an excellent choice, never taking his eyes off Liu Yi. Both were eager to see which mirror copy Liu Yi would choose, hoping to place their bets. Liu Yi checked his own stats. He had reached level 5, and his attributes had doubled, but he still felt weak. He realized he needed to become stronger, that he had to overcome his fear of battle, because if he did not, he would die soon. With determination, he immediately chose his next opponent, a mirror copy ranked 55th, known as Strikes. The system teleported him to the arena almost instantly. The 2 guys who had been watching Liu Yi were waiting to place their bets on his fight, but were confused when they saw who his opponent would be. They were shocked when they realized that Liu Yi had chosen a level 10 mirror copy, nicknamed Strikes. The guy with green hair snapped back to reality, realizing that Liu Yi had chosen the strongest opponent possible, out of the hundreds of level 10 players. He wondered what would happen to their bet, hoping it had not been placed yet. But the guy with white hair revealed that the bet had already been made, and there was nothing they could do about it. He hoped that in case of defeat, the green-haired friend would not tell anyone about the bet, as he did not want to be embarrassed. The betting organizer then announced the odds for the match, showing the bets placed on Liu Yi and Strikes. Seeing the odds, the 2 guys felt discouraged. The total amount bet on Strikes' victory exceeded 200,000, and they had already lost all hope. At that moment, Strikes appeared before Liu Yi. Strikes with a katana in hand was equipped with the Persistent Fighter set, while Liu Yi, a level 5 player, only had a pistol, a dagger, and basic gear. The countdown at the start of the battle began, and as soon as Liu Yi saw his opponent, his legs began to shake again. This angered him. To stop the shaking, he drove the dagger into one of his legs. With only 2 seconds left before the battle began, he took a combat stance, determined not to repeat the mistakes of his first fight. When the battle started, Liu Yi wasted no time and immediately advanced towards Strikes, skillfully dodging his attacks. Although the pistol of Liu Yi was powerful, his accuracy was not the best, and Strikes managed to dodge or block most of the shots. After a while, Strikes grew tired of this and quickly disarmed Liu Yi. Without hesitation, Strikes went in for a fatal strike. It seemed impossible to dodge the blow, but Liu Yi was not ready to give up. He activated his special ability, and his eyes glowed blue. Liu Yi made an incredible leap forward, narrowly dodging Strikes' deadly strike. After sliding back a bit, he realized that Strikes was not pursuing him. With a moment to recover, Liu Yi analyzed the situation. His health was at 20 out of 100, and his cognitive power was at 28 out of 30. The battle had just begun, but Liu Yi was focused on his survival. Liu Yi was one step away from defeat. His regular attacks could not even scratch his opponent, and he realized he had chosen an adversary he could not defeat. He should have opted for a weaker fighter and used that time to level up rather than rushing so quickly. But still, after a moment of doubt, Liu Yi returned to his combat stance, almost finding it funny how hard things were becoming. He believed that in order to overcome his fear, he needed to keep fighting and not give up. Considering that standing still was not a good option, he decided to charge directly at his enemy. At one point, the hero turned to the side to avoid being struck by a fatal blow that would have wiped out his entire health. However, Liu Yi underestimated his opponent's speed. In mere seconds, Strikes was behind him, catching him by surprise. Liu Yi realized he had no more chances to win, so he decided to risk it all. Before the fatal blow could land, he turned to face Strikes, drawing his pistol and shooting. In a final clash, they exchanged fatal blows. Strike's katana cut Liu Yi in half, while Liu Yi's pistol shot destroyed Strike's head. The system determined that Liu Yi inflicted fatal damage faster than Strike's, and therefore he was declared the winner. His reward was a large amount of experience money and a level up. Now, Liu Yi was much stronger at level 13, with all his attributes increased to 17 except for resistance, which only increased by 1 point. He let out a sigh of relief, realizing that he had been on the verge of death, and yet he had won that incredible battle. Many more notifications arrived, the most important being that he had reached level 10. And now his resurrection ability had evolved to the point where he could choose his development path. Meanwhile, the two guys who had bet on Liu Yi's victory were surrounded by a crowd and pressed against the wall. Those who had lost the bet were required to hand over all the money to the other participants. One of the guys nearly started crying, asking if there was an option to give half of the money instead of all of it. The one-eyed gang pointed at them and said there was no such option, and they could not escape this easy loss. The guy with white hair could not take it anymore and shouted, saying he could not believe they really thought they had already won when the outcome was not even decided yet. Gang, pointing at the board, firmly stated that Strikes would win as he could not lose to a newbie. If that happened, he would be ready to cause a huge ruckus with the bets. Before Gang said this, Strikes was considered one of the leaders among the level 10 mirror copies. However, moments later, the board was updated, and everyone was shocked to see that Strikes had been defeated. The crowd around them could hardly believe it, and their mouths dropped open in astonishment. Their world instantly crumbled. The guy with green hair was overjoyed, happy with the victory, and the two friends were thrilled that they had won. Meanwhile, Liu Yi, the protagonist, returned victorious from the arena. The list suddenly appeared before him. He looked at it for the first time and did not fully understand what it meant, but decided to finish the game. When he was about to leave the game, his sister came into the room and called him to eat. Upon entering the kitchen, Liu Yi wasted no time and started eating immediately. Young, his sister said she had prepared his favorite mushrooms. But Liu Yi did not even pay attention to her words, so immersed was he in his thoughts about Yuan World. There, he had discovered 2 new abilities he did not even know he had. The first ability was the Flame of Invasion, which had an incredible effect. The damage per second dropped from 50 to 25, but the total damage was around 250 health points. Along with his abilities, Liu Yi also thought about the dangers posed by his opponents and considered the idea of forming his own team. After eating quickly, he thanked his sister and headed back to his room, which surprised her as he had barely eaten a plate of food. This even hurt her a bit, and she thought that he would need to find someone to cook for him. Now, back in Yuan World within the Mirror World buildings, a man was on his knees before Gang Zi. He was begging to be allowed to keep half of the money as had been proposed. However, the man was not so simple and continued to beg, saying that all the money he had bet on the victory of Strikes was not his, but belonged to his family. If he lost it all, he would likely face severe punishment. Gang Zi, still mocking him, said that just a minute ago he had rejected such an offer, and now the man was offering the same thing. Before he could finish speaking, a guy with red hair appeared and slammed the head of Gang Zi against the wall. He said that he would have to return all the lost money from the bet against Strikes. The guy with red hair was named Jack and was from the New Order Guild responsible for the Mirror World. Gang was pressed against the wall, trying to explain that the person who defeated Strikes had nothing to do with him. He had only placed the bet and did not know that Liu Yi would choose the Strikes copy to defeat him. But what Gang said to Jack did not bother him at all. Jack replied that in the end, the guy with white hair was the one who came out on top. And even if Gang managed to escape responsibility, things would be dealt with differently in the real world. Gang tried to defend himself as best as he could, and in order to avoid trouble in real life, he offered all the money he had earned from the bet. However, Jack suddenly refused, saying he did not need it and let the poor man go. Gang thought for a moment, and with a very serious expression on his face, said that he had nothing else to offer as compensation. Jack, with a terrifying look, merely commented that Gang would have to do him a favor, and of course he had no choice but to agree. Now back to our hero. After dinner, he entered the game again to continue leveling up. He knew he could not hesitate as he needed to be well prepared for Judgment Day. Soon, Liu Yi received a notification confirming his choice, which was to improve the skill Cure Key. Without hesitation, he confirmed the upgrade and received 3 notifications. The first was about the skill he had chosen. The second informed him that his counter was complete and his combat strength was now 15.6. Additionally, he received a new title called Low-Level Warrior. One of the biggest surprises for Liu Yi was realizing that by choosing the skill, he had acquired a double attribute. Several of his stats had increased significantly. When he looked at his stats, he was very surprised as some of his attributes had risen considerably. When he reached level 100, Liu Yi became much weaker, and he realized this because, although he had only reached level 13 with the new attributes and bonuses, he was now at the same level as a level 26 character. Liu Yi then reflected on the possibility of defeating a level 20 strikes with his current strength. However, from being an insecure guy, Liu Yi transformed into someone confident. He was determined to challenge strikes considering him his opponent and wanting to test his strength against him. Next, a notification appeared before him asking for confirmation for a battle with strikes, to which he promptly responded confirming. A few seconds after choosing his opponent, the bets for the fight started appearing at the neighborhood betting houses and in the player chat. Someone placed a bet, and two guys whom Jack had asked to spread the information began to promote it. One of them bet all his money on the victory of the protagonist, which outraged the man with golden hair. They did not need to place bets, but the guy with white hair was convinced that now Jack could not do anything because even if he tried, he would not get support from his group called the New Order. The blonde guy noticed the disdainful smile from his friend. He deduced that Jack had forced him to promote the odds in favor of the protagonist. However, he did not understand the significance of the situation, as it was obvious that no one would bet on Liu Yi, and the odds would be very low. But the guy did not respond because his task was only to cause confusion. The scene shifted to the battle arena within the Mirror Kingdom, where the fight was about to begin in 10 seconds. On one side, Strikes level 20, armed with 2 katanas and advanced armor. On the other, Liu Yi level 13 with only a pistol, a dagger, and beginner gear. Liu Yi began to reflect, thinking that with enough cognitive power reserve, he would be able to predict the right moment to easily destroy Strikes. The system announced the start of the battle. The protagonist did not hesitate and attacked immediately. Strikes managed to defend with his katanas deflecting all the bullets. While attacking, Liu Yi tried to get closer, reflecting the blows. He noticed that the dual attributes had practically eliminated the strength gap between them, which boosted his confidence. Now, battles with high-level opponents would not be as intense as before. Dodging from side to side, Liu Yi only used his pistol and reflected on how much stronger he had become. He allowed the enemy to get close enough so he could attack with his daggers and aim for the head of Strikes, planning to end the fight in the final seconds. With a smile on his face, he was about to kill the opponent and finish the battle. Strikes, on the other hand, could not believe that a weak low-level player was able to attack him and stood frozen with no reaction. At the moment Liu Yi saw the face of his opponent, he became confused and did not know what to do, canceling the pistol shot. As the hero had slowed Strikes down, there was enough time for a counterattack. However, after dodging, Liu Yi jumped backward, avoiding any damage. Suddenly, he was overwhelmed with a wave of anger as he remembered his opponent stopping his action and holding his head. Unsure of how to proceed, he did not understand why he had not shot him. He thought about the fact that he was afraid, and also that he simply feared death. Looking at his opponent and the weapon, the young man thought. He felt he would never be able to take his fate into his own hands, and most importantly, that he would never grow and would continue to fear everyone in his way. Tightening the weapon harder, he understood that his future was being decided right there. Despite his opponent, Liu Yi also understood that only one winner would leave this battle, and the fate of the protagonist was at stake. With an impressive leap towards Strikes, both decided to collide head-on. Strikes delivered the first blow, which should have decapitated our hero, but Liu Yi in turn managed to dodge quickly, moving behind him. Then he grabbed him by the head, pointed the gun, and in that moment his thoughts were clear. He had already grown and become a completely different person. Without hesitation for even a second, Liu Yi fired, and soon 3 notifications appeared before him. The first said that he had defeated Strikes. The second said his level had increased, and the third that he had reached level 20, now able to choose how to further develop his power. The face of the protagonist was incredibly serious. He understood that now not only had he grown, but he was also ahead of all the other players. Meanwhile, in the lobby, those who had bet on our hero could not believe what they were seeing as they had truly won. Then, unexpectedly, the guy with green hair commented that the bets did not affect the other players. Even though Jack had opened his second bet on the level 20 Strikes, he still lost to Liu Yi. Now everyone knew how strong he was. The same guy began to think that after defeating the level 20 Strikes, Liu Yi had probably reached level 22 or even 23. He concluded that Liu Yi could only fight against level 30 mirror copies, whose rewards were very high. The hero knew it was Strikes, but the guy could not understand how Liu Yi had so much confidence that he could defeat a level 30 Strikes mirror copy with 100% certainty. They assumed that as soon as the protagonist faced the level 30 Strikes, he would likely lose and be in great danger. As soon as Liu Yi teleported back to the Mirror Kingdom, he realized that not only had he grown, but he had also placed himself ahead of the other players. Looking at the tournament standings, he saw a level 30 mirror copy of Strikes, occupying first place. Liu Yi had proven to himself that he was stronger than the other players. Now he needed to destroy the level 30 mirror copy of Strikes, as most players said it was invincible. Before entering the battle, rumors started circulating around the protagonist. People were saying that one of the players had restarted to take revenge on the level 30 Strikes, but in the end lost. The invincible copy and the strongest fighter were attributed to Strikes for a reason, and the most important thing he had heard, that thanks to this copy, the New Order Guild had become the strongest because of Strikes. After that, Liu Yi did not hesitate to call the system in front of him with a murderous look as he was eager for the fight with Strikes. The system asked again if Liu Yi really wanted to enter the battle against the level 30 mirror copy of Strikes. Of course, he did not hesitate, and the system immediately transferred him. Jack, who was observing Liu Yi from afar, ordered all his subordinates to open bets on the victory of Strikes. We shifted to two guys, and one of them opened a bet on the victory of the protagonist, which caused the green-haired man to lose his patience. He believed Liu Yi had no chance against the level 30 Strikes. However, the white-haired guy did not listen to his words, but stated that he believed in Liu Yi. Soon, we were transported to the arena where the enemy Strikes level 30 was. His weapon was quite unusual, a katana named Last Will, and the armor called Fierce. Liu Yi, on the other hand, was at level 23, with a pistol, a common dagger, and beginner equipment. This seemed to indicate that he had no chance at all. After a moment, a notification appeared before Liu Yi. It informed him that his intelligence attribute had surpassed 100 points, and the knowledge power of intelligence had increased by +1. Focused on the notifications, Liu Yi did not notice that the battle had started. Strikes did not waste time, and attacked immediately, dealing 411 damage to his health. Liu Yi was shocked, as he only had 18 health left, and he could not believe the speed of Strikes. The second attack should have finished Liu Yi, but somehow he managed to defend with his dagger and did not die. With each second of the battle, Liu Yi became more frustrated with his opponent, realizing the severity of the fight. If he had defended just 1 second later, he would have died and would not have had time to apply healing. With great difficulty, he managed to repel the attack and dodge backward, while dealing damage to Strikes with his pistol. Each bullet flew with impressive precision. Liu Yi did not want to prolong the fight and tried to finish the battle as quickly as possible. However, all of his attempts to hurt the opponent were in vain, as Strikes easily dodged them. This gave the impression that everything was happening in slow motion for him. With a single movement, Strikes was within reach, about to end the fight with a blow. Liu Yi had not expected such a twist, and to his surprise, Strikes, who barely intercepted the dagger attack, still managed to deal damage to the protagonist. This forced him to heal constantly. Liu Yi could not withstand the attack, and for a moment, if he had not reacted, he would have moved on to the next world in the game. However, he recovered in time, dodging the attack of Strikes by crouching and moving to the side. Liu Yi immediately increased the distance between them, and tried once more to deal damage to Strikes with his pistol. Suddenly, Liu Yi plunged into his own thoughts. He realized that despite his stats being similar to those of the level 46 Strikes, Strikes was still managing to pressure him. But after composing himself, Liu Yi was not willing to give up. He understood that if this was all the power of Strikes, he could easily deal incredible damage in a few seconds and secure the victory. That is when Liu Yi decided to use the skill Blessing Study. This skill increased all the stats of the target, along with activating an uncommon state lasting for 1 minute. Liu Yi also studied the curse, which could cause one of 10 effects, such as weakness, aging, lethargy, stupidity, fatigue, poisoning, hallucinations, perception, changes, chaos, and madness. After learning the skill, a notification appeared before the protagonist saying that the blessing had been learned. His combat power was 15. But the most important thing was that the stats of the guy had increased several times, giving the protagonist a significant advantage over Strikes. Liu Yi did not hesitate and shouted to activate the blessing. He understood he did not have enough levels to defeat Strikes, but he trusted his attributes to do so. Moments later, a notification appeared. It informed him that he had spent 400 cognitive power points and that all his attributes had increased by 200 for exactly 1 minute, after which they would return to normal. A white aura began to surround Liu Yi, spreading terror to all who stood in front of him. It was this aura that gave him courage, as he knew that by activating the skill for a full minute, he would have enough power to destroy Strikes. Strikes, caught off guard, stood still. He was preparing for the next attack of the protagonist, but decided to take a more proactive approach. He charged at full speed, intending to finish Liu Yi off once and for all, so they wouldn't have to face him again. Liu Yi briefly thought that once he defeated Strikes, everyone would immediately assume that he had incredible skills and attributes, making him known as the strongest player. But as he regained his focus, Liu Yi realized that the enemy was closing in rapidly while he dodged from side to side. Even dodging wasn't enough to avoid Strikes. He was already close enough to attack. Liu Yi then aimed his pistol and fired. The first bullet hit Strikes in the chest, causing him to halt his attack and become confused. After the first shot, Liu Yi didn't stop continuing to fire at the enemy relentlessly. A few seconds later, more than 10 holes were visible in Strikes' body, which should have indicated he was down. But suddenly, he was completely unharmed and ready to continue the fight. With a smile on his face, the enemy seemed to have understood what was happening. While reloading his magazine, Liu Yi realized that, firstly, the opponent's stats were much higher than those of players of the same level. Additionally, he possessed passive abilities that activated during critical moments. This was Strikes' true strength. Moreover, the system of the Mirror Kingdom worked against new players, which made victories even harder to achieve. Liu Yi understood that he was an exception, and so he took a combat stance. With the duration of the blessing nearing its end, he knew he needed to finish off Strikes before then. Determined to prevent the energy from ending prematurely, Liu Yi began attacking Strikes. There were only 25 seconds left of his active ability. As he attacked, he knew he couldn't afford to lose, as the current goal was to surpass his past and take control of his destiny, something he had failed to do before. With each attack, Strikes got closer to the protagonist. With 15 seconds remaining, Liu Yi jumped backward and launched a counterattack. As time ticked away, Liu Yi continued to attack and repel Strikes, not giving the enemy a moment's rest. Just a few seconds before the skill ended, a bullet shot straight into Strikes' forehead, destroying his armor. Strikes began to shake violently, and his weapon fell from his hands. He stopped attacking a moment later, completely exhausted. He collapsed, showing clear signs that he no longer had any life left. The system notification began to dissolve. The enemy's body lay on the ground, and Liu Yi stared at it, unable to believe that he had defeated the most powerful opponent in the Mirror Kingdom's copy world. He already imagined the comments that would follow his victory, as now he would be called the strongest player. He was the one who managed to defeat a level 30 enemy, the mighty Strikes. Moreover, his hidden abilities were incredible, granting him the properties of an invincible warrior. Someone commented that these titles meant nothing to level 30 players, as they belonged to completely different worlds in terms of strength. To illustrate, one of the spectators explained that at most a level 30 player was like the ground beneath the protagonist's feet, meaning they would never reach his level. The protagonist's imagination made his self-esteem soar further, boosting his morale after his victory over Strikes. Then, several notifications appeared on his interface. The first congratulated him for his victory over Strikes, while the second informed him of his massive rewards both in money and experience. He could barely contain his happiness, as he not only gained money and experience but also overcame a huge fear. At that moment, the system teleported him back to the Mirror Kingdom. In the waiting room, Jack watched the battle, unable to believe that Liu Yi had defeated the strongest copy in the Mirror Kingdom. What angered him even more, however, was the money he had lost by betting on Strikes' victory. Meanwhile, two players who had bet on the protagonist were euphoric. They jumped for joy, and a white-haired young man smiled at the surrounding spectators, saying that he had been right about Liu Yi and that his bet had paid off. For that reason, he suggested that from now on, everyone should always follow their instincts. However, his friend grabbed his arm and warned that it was too early to celebrate, as many things could still happen. He then advised that they both disconnect from the game and, in real life, move to another apartment to avoid being found by Jack. The scene shifted to the real world at the protagonist's house, where he was sitting on his bed, silently reflecting on his victory over Strikes, the strongest copy in the game. Suddenly, the door opened, and a girl appeared from another room, commenting that he was probably hungry and inviting him to eat something. However, he had other plans. With a smile on his face, he said they would go out for a walk and he would take her for a barbecue. As they went down the stairs, the girl asked her brother where he had gotten the money from, since restaurants were expensive for them. Laughing, he replied that she wouldn't believe it, as he had won a large sum in the game, and that's why they needed to toast their luck. His sister accepted without questioning, and didn't ask for further details. The next day, still at the protagonist's house, he made an online purchase. After completing the transaction, he received confirmation that the order would arrive in 2 months. Sitting at the table, he couldn't believe it, as in just 24 days, Yuan World was supposed to take control of the real world. This made those 2 months feel like an agonizing wait. Still, he had no choice, as the nearest store he checked was out of stock. Instead of letting it get him down, he gathered all his determination. He decided that he needed to push himself even harder while waiting for the delivery. The scene then shifts, and we see two girls walking along the shoreline. They were extremely embarrassed, as all the passers-by were staring at them. Suddenly, the best friend decided to ask Yan why Liu Yi had invited the girl on a date. Thoughts began to flood her mind, and she feared that something terrible had happened. However, Yan kept a radiant smile from ear to ear and remained silent for a moment. Immersed in her thoughts, she was wondering how she would introduce her brother to her friend, as that was her true goal. After all, the girl was incredibly attractive, came from a good family, and most importantly, had a wonderful character. If she became her brother's fiancée, Yan wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. A moment later, returning to reality, Yan smiled and replied that her brother had missed her a lot. This was why he wanted to see her. Without much expression, the friend asked where she had been lately since she hadn't even responded in their work group. Yuan began to suspect that her friend might have a boyfriend. But even if that were true, she wouldn't give up on her plans as she had already firmly decided that she would go out with Liu Yi. Nan, sighing, adjusted her cap and said she didn't even know how to explain it. Suddenly, the girl shouted loudly, revealing that her parents were forcing her to play an incredible online game. Yuan was confused by that unexpected response and didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, we are transported to a local bar. Jack, filled with rage, struck a red-haired girl whom he had called over in an attempt to calm him down. The blow was brutal, and the girl fell to the ground, hitting it violently. Even while she was injured and struggling to stay conscious, Jack continued to attack her. He hated the way she tried to calm him as he felt that she pitied him, and that was something he despised. A crowd began to gather around, outraged by what they were witnessing, but no one had the courage to intervene. After all, this wasn't the first time Jack had acted this way. When he noticed the stares of the people around him, he became even angrier and asked what they were whispering about him. However, no one responded. On the contrary, one by one, they began to disperse, running in different directions to avoid meeting the same fate as the girl lying on the ground. Still dissatisfied, Jack spat on the girl before picking up his phone upon hearing a friend call him. He answered the call immediately and asked if the person on the other end had found the protagonist's address. The answer was negative, but the person assured him they had a plan. Jack listened carefully and without hesitation asked if the plan was truly foolproof. When he heard that success was guaranteed 100%, his expression changed. His furious eyes made it clear that he longed for revenge against Liu Yi and wouldn't stop until he got it. With a voice filled with malice, Jack said that as soon as they found the guy, he would send the rest of the money immediately. The conversation ended, and the scene shifts to Liu Yi, who at that moment had just entered the game. He stood in front of the Mirror Kingdom building, reflecting on the maximum level of the mirror copies, which was level 30. He understood that at his current level, he could no longer evolve there, as the enemies were far too weak for him. With that in mind, he decided it was time to leave. Turning around, he started walking toward the destroyed kingdom, a place where he could become even stronger. However, as he stopped and looked at his own appearance, he realized he couldn't continue wearing his starting armor. It was time to think about buying a new one. Liu Yi walked to a weapon store. As he approached the storefront, a system window popped up in front of him, displaying the available items for purchase. However, upon seeing the prices, he froze for a few seconds. His expression made it clear that he simply couldn't spend so much on armor. Disappointed, he left the store and continued walking through the Mirror Kingdom. Soon he realized there was no reason to stay there anymore. It was impossible to find the necessary resources to craft equipment. Therefore, he decided to go to the Destroyed Kingdom, where he could easily obtain the materials and craft level 20 equipment. Although he had enough money to directly buy level 20 equipment, he preferred not to rush. After all, he would soon reach level 30. And moreover, he needed to manage his money in the real world as well. Without wasting any time, he set off for the Destroyed Kingdom. There, he intended to join a team, as he knew that would accelerate his evolution and help him obtain equipment more quickly. Upon arrival, he saw that many teams were recruiting players to explore dungeons of different levels. Some accepted level 20 players, while others were looking for level 30 players for harder raids. He stood aside for a moment and overheard a conversation between two players talking about a new guild order. They mentioned a recent attack on the level 40 Chaos Dungeon in which 10 players participated, but all were defeated and had their stats reset. Later, he knew that there were only 4 requirements to complete a dungeon regardless of the team size. In fact, the more people participated, the greater the reward at the end. However, there was a crucial detail. Once inside the dungeon, there was no exit until it was fully completed. Furthermore, in the Yuan World, dying in the Destroyed Kingdom meant a complete reset and the loss of all equipment. For this reason, teams were extremely selective when recruiting new members. With the skills he had, Liu Yi believed he would be accepted without any problem. Convinced of this, he approached the first recruiter but was immediately rejected as the team only accepted level 30 players. He tried again in another group but was turned away due to his low-quality equipment. On the third attempt, he didn't even get a chance to speak as the team was already full and didn't need any new players. Frustrated and completely disappointed, he dropped to his knees. He couldn't believe that no one wanted to accept him even after he had defeated Strike's a level 30 enemy. He thought his strength should be taken into account regardless of his level or equipment, as he had already proven that he wasn't a weak player. Disheartened, he began to consider exploring the easier dungeons. He wanted to obtain basic equipment, but he knew that would be a long and tedious process. Even so, he gathered the strength to stand up and was preparing to take this only option when suddenly he heard footsteps behind him. Soon after, a voice announced that a team was looking for one more member. Curious, Liu Yi turned around to see what it was about, not understanding exactly who the offer was directed to. In front of him was Jack, smiling. With a calculating look, Jack suggested that he join the expedition in a dangerous level 35 dungeon designed for 10-player teams. Exchanging glances with Liu Yi realized there was something strange about that proposal. Still, Jack kept talking, assuring him that the team was strong enough to handle the challenges alone. They just needed one more person to complete the group. For the raid portal to be activated, one more player was required. Surprised, the protagonist couldn't believe what he was seeing. Moreover, he felt that he had seen Jack somewhere before but couldn't quite remember exactly where. Jack, without giving Liu Yi time to think, said that if he wasn't interested, he would look for someone else. Not wanting to miss this opportunity, Liu Yi immediately interrupted him and accepted the offer. Jack merely waved his hand and told him to follow him. Together they went to the entrance of the level 30 portal meant for a group of 10 players. When they reached the meeting point near the destroyed royal portal, they found a crowd. The players around them were wearing impressive armor, which led many to comment on the leader's unexpected choice. No one had expected him to recruit a rookie armed only with a simple pistol. Liu Yi observed the other players and quickly realized that they were very well equipped. The purple outfits indicated that more than half of the team had timeless rarity equipment. He held his head thoughtfully, wondering if he could at least steal some of that equipment. Suddenly, one of the players shouted that now that everyone was gathered, they should leave immediately. He wanted to reach level 40 as fast as possible. A bald man approached with a smile and said that once they reached level 40, they would need to change their equipment. And if that was the case, he could give his old gear to the group. However, the player simply smiled and declined the offer, unless someone carried his weapon with 3 rare items from the inventory, which no one accepted. The group then began moving toward the portal, with Liu Yi following slowly behind them. Observing the players, he noticed that they all seemed to know each other well, and couldn't understand why they had called him for this level 35 mission. However, he noticed the malicious smiles from the team. He realized that this friendship hid ulterior motives. The portal finally opened, revealing an immense desert landscape. At the center of the scene, there was only a mysterious crystal. Jack and another player were the first to cross the portal and began analyzing the environment. Soon, one of the team members noticed that the mission objective was to protect the crystal. Jack immediately took charge and ordered everyone to surround the crystal and ensure its safety. Everyone followed the instructions except Liu Yi, who hesitated for a moment. It was then that Jack warned that anyone who allowed the monsters to reach the crystal would have to pay for the damage with their own money. Liu Yi was surprised by the team's organization, although he didn't show it. Still not in a hurry to position himself, he watched the crystal carefully. Suddenly, a notification appeared before his eyes. The mission was loading. A few seconds later, another message informed him that the task was to protect the crystal from 3 waves of enemies. At the bottom of the screen, he saw the crystal's health bar and the penalty for failure death for all players. It was then that a shout interrupted his thoughts. Someone announced that the monsters were attacking. Liu Yi looked toward the desert but saw nothing but dense fog. However, he soon realized that this fog was not ordinary and had been generated by the monsters themselves. From within the smokescreen, an enemy emerged at high speed. The creature looked like a spider but had absurdly large fangs. The bald man shouted for Liu Yi to approach the crystal, warning that if he didn't follow orders, he could be killed. Without arguing, the protagonist obeyed. Meanwhile, a swarm of monstrous insects flew toward the bald man, who was holding an enormous axe. It seemed that his game was about to end right there. But the guy had completely different plans for this raid. With a single swing of his axe, he destroyed several beetles at once. He watched as the others also eliminated large beetles, as if they were ants, and realized that their teamwork was at the highest level. The protagonist understood that this group knew exactly what they were doing. He felt redundant in that battle, and realized he didn't need to exert himself too much, as he might end up being a hindrance. Jack was destroying monsters one by one until suddenly he stopped and looked seriously at his ally with the sword. With just one look from Jack, the ally understood that he needed to let one of the monsters pass to the protagonist. Without hesitation, he allowed the first enemy that attacked him to pass by. He pretended that he didn't have time to kill it. The spider-like creature advanced toward the protagonist, with the intent to destroy the crystal. However, the young man didn't hesitate. With a smile on his face, he heard the others asking him to protect the crystal as they had let a monster slip by. It took only a few seconds for him to defeat the enemy. At that moment, he thought that although they worked well together, his strength was equivalent to that of an average player, and that they were nowhere near the level of the strike boss he had defeated. Soon after, a notification appeared in front of him, informing that they had protected the crystal from the first of 3 waves, and that the next wave would arrive in 10 minutes. After exterminating all the monsters, they sat down to rest. One of them commented that the protagonist was truly skilled, as at first glance, no one would say he was a master. With beginner gear, Liu Yi managed to defeat a monster 10 levels higher than them. The man with the sword who had let the monster pass blamed himself for his mistake. If the 10th member of the group hadn't suddenly disappeared, there would have been no flaws in the defense. The bald man reassured him, telling him not to worry, as the problem had already been resolved. He then turned to the protagonist and warned him that in the next wave, he would have to fight alongside them in defense, ensuring no monster passed. The man sitting next to Liu Yi suggested that they could invite the protagonist to join their team so that he could be noticed. Then he asked the protagonist what he thought about the idea of joining the group. He said it would save him from having to look for people to form his own. Furthermore, by playing together, they could tackle high-level challenges. The protagonist really liked the proposal and even considered accepting it immediately. Soon after his agreement, the man in black armor asked Jack what he thought about Liu Yi joining them. Jack smiled and replied that he didn't oppose his entry into the group, but there were a few conditions. New members needed to provide their phone number and real address, as it would protect them from situations like the one they had faced earlier. Hearing this, the protagonist was confused. He didn't respond, just kept listening. Jack began talking about how difficult it had been to acquire that equipment, and in the end, Sam had taken everything for himself. Because of this, they now had problems with monsters. If Liu Yi wanted to join them, he would have to accept these conditions. The protagonist thought about it and understood the situation perfectly, even though no one had explained it to him clearly. After his words, Jack and his allies displayed malicious smiles that were hard to ignore. This made Liu Yi even more suspicious. They said their goal was to invite him to the raid, and for a few seconds everyone was paralyzed. Not knowing what to do, Liu Yi quickly stood up and observed the large number of mid-level players in the hall, realizing that this clearly was not a coincidence. They had intentionally chosen him, and as soon as they entered the raid, they showed friendliness toward him. Then they deliberately let the monster pass to see what the real power of the protagonist was. In the end, they invited him to join the team permanently. With a smile on his face, Liu Yi concluded that based on everything that had happened, they were trying to gather information about his real address. Looking at Jack, from whom intense anger radiated, the protagonist kept talking. He suggested that Jack was probably the one responsible for the mirror realm of the New Order Guild. Before joining them, he had overheard the conversation of the same two guys talking about the New Order Guild, which had the real address of a 20-year-old guy who could defeat strikes. Since then, no one had seen that guy again. The young man smiled and said that he was flattered that his efforts had been recognized, especially for defeating a level 30 strikes. With that, the protagonist realized that Jack had gathered everyone there to find out his real address and then deal with him. Jack, trying to hide his true personality, claimed that the protagonist had probably mistaken him for someone else. With his weapon in hand, the protagonist stated that in reality, he did not want to join their team. He was just thinking about making some money and gaining experience with such a strong team in a raid. However, seeing their intentions, he realized he should not pretend anymore. After all, they were enemies, and enemies should be eliminated. Jack stood up, glaring at the protagonist with a terrifying look, while his entire team surrounded him. Then he started talking, mocking the idea that Liu Yi thought he could defeat 9 players all 10 levels above him. One of the group members attacked the protagonist from behind, shouting that he was a disgrace. At that moment, a notification appeared before Liu Yi, informing that he had spent 30 power points to increase his next attack by 1,500 damage, leaving him with 414 power points and 450 cognition remaining. The very next instant, the sword-wielding attacker fell dead. He was thrown several meters away. Everyone was stunned by what they saw. With a single blow, he had killed an opponent 10 levels stronger than him. Those surrounding him were shocked, as no one expected a man to defeat in an instant someone so much stronger than him. Something began happening to the body of the dead character. It started glowing in an intense blue hue, as if it were absorbing something and transforming into another substance. After the transformation, an unknown orb appeared before the protagonist called the Blue Military Pearl. Note: military pearls drop when a player is defeated. There is a possibility of receiving a random item from the equipment or inventory of the defeated player. The protagonist picked up the orb and with a serious expression asked, "What is impossible about defeating 9 players?" Jack was furious and ready to tear him apart. He believed that the young man was overly confident. Soon, Jack gave the order for everyone to attack the protagonist at once, and they all charged, trying to defeat him as quickly as possible. Unfortunately for them, the young man no longer knew mercy. A few seconds later, the first girl was finished, just like the man with the hole in his head. The protagonist killed them one by one. He knew that by killing those enemies, he was taking away their chances of survival. But unfortunately, he had no other choice. He could not die there. His sister would not be able to obtain the identities of the players. So regardless of what anyone said, he needed to become stronger. With his current strength, he would not be able to protect his sister when the Yuan World took over their world. The protagonist decided he needed to climb to the top, but first, he had to eliminate those who could stop him in the future. So, to achieve his goal, Liu Yi decided to cross the mountain of corpses piling up around him. Jack and his entire squad stood paralyzed, wondering why they could not kill him. Their levels were much higher than those of the protagonist, and their equipment was better. The young man was extremely irritated, although he had already assumed the protagonist was this strong because he had defeated a level 30 strikes clone. All of his allies tried to persuade the protagonist to stop. They believed that if he killed a few more of them, they would not be able to clear the dungeons and would lose all their resources. The protagonist replied that it did not matter to him since he could simply go to the secret mirror zone and do the same. What he lost, he could recover in a single day. But with them, it was different. Their equipment would be lost, and they would not have the strength or skills to defeat the Mirror Realm characters. Jack became even more irritated and said he could gather people to prevent the protagonist from entering the secret mirror zone, but Liu Yi just laughed in response. Then he began killing Jack's allies, something Jack himself couldn't believe. Jack wanted to order them to prevent more deaths. But before he could speak, 2 players behind him were already dead. As his allies were being defeated, Jack remembered a moment when he had greeted an important person who told him they should remain the top players in Yuan World. If they could keep that position, it didn't matter what they did to achieve it, as he would support them. However, looking at them, he added that if they failed, he wouldn't just stop supporting them, but would also reveal all their crimes, ensuring they were punished immediately. When Jack snapped back to reality, he realized everyone around him was dead, leaving only himself. Liu Yi prepared to finish Jack off, but Jack knelt and began begging for mercy, pleading with the protagonist not to kill him. The young man didn't respond, only stared at him seriously, which only made Jack even angrier. He felt so pathetic that it disgusted him. Jack said that if he were spared, he would reveal the secret about Yuan World. Liu Yi smiled and told him to speak immediately without beating around the bush. Jack asked the protagonist to promise not to kill him right after, but instead he was thrown several meters back. Liu Yi said that since he didn't want to talk, maybe it was better for him to go to the next world, as he didn't really want to know the secret yet. Jack landed a few meters away from Liu Yi, but didn't disappear or turn into pearls after the impact. He managed to survive the blow and tried to get up trembling, which surprised the protagonist. Liu Yi was impressed by Jack's resilience, wondering how he had survived a direct attack. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming from deep in the desert, and immediately deduced that a second wave was about to begin. To start, Jack said Liu Yi must know some of Yuan World's secrets, as without them, he couldn't have become so strong. What surprised Jack the most was that even he couldn't handle Liu Yi. Because of that, he planned to report everything to his superiors. And after that, Liu Yi would have to deal with not just him, but likely would soon die and return to level 1. Getting back on his feet, Jack continued, saying that the protagonist really thought he could resist people stronger than him like Jack. That was impossible, as very few people could level up this way. And when the secret Liu Yi seemed to know became useless, Jack was sure he would no longer have any advantage. The man began begging again for the protagonist to let him go. In exchange, he would reveal his secret, and together, they could use Liu Yi's incredible strength to clear the remaining dungeon. Liu Yi smiled and asked why he thought he would die and not be able to clear the dungeon alone. Jack couldn't believe the protagonist's words since he was only level 28, and no matter how strong he was, everyone had their limits, or so Jack believed. But suddenly the protagonist asked, "What if I had level 56 equipment? Wouldn't it be easy for me to clear a level 35 dungeon?" Jack couldn't believe Liu Yi's words. The protagonist held 2 pearls in his hands and asked if this was, by any chance, the equipment he wasn't supposed to have. Looking closer, Jack saw the blue orb in the man's hands. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The surprise on his face was unmistakable. With a confident and determined smile, the protagonist shouted for the blue orb to open and release his equipment. In an instant, the protagonist appeared dressed in yellow and black armor. He wore a shielded tank top that gave him incredible buffs, and it was also purple rank. The fast combat suit of purple rank protected his entire body, offering resistance, strength, agility, and armor, requiring level 30. The combat gloves provided the same attributes with more focus on perception, but strength was removed. High-speed violet rank combat boots granted the protagonist impressive agility. Most importantly, there was the beam-like katana of purple rank, which gave Liu Yi a bonus of 160 attack power. It also increased his defense by 30. Now the hero had incredible stats. And after calculating his combat power, he had level 46 abilities. With a smile on his face, he commented that he should thank the men who had just died by his hands as he had gained free equipment. Now with this gear, his combat abilities had increased more than threefold, showing that his opponents had truly failed to seize good opportunities to defeat him. Jack's face was completely shocked. He couldn't believe that Liu Yi had nearly tripled his attributes. Moments later, he realized everything was starting to irritate him. The surprise turned into anger and hatred. He began shouting that no matter how much stronger the hero had become, he wouldn't be able to clear the dungeon alone. That was simply impossible. Around them, sounds of monsters approached at incredible speed. Then one of the monsters leaped onto the crystal. The heroes killed anyone who got close without even blinking. After killing one ant, several others appeared. Hundreds of ants attacked from behind, trying to kill him and reset his level. Liu Yi wasn't going to give up so easily. One by one, he killed the ants, not giving them a chance to win. Liu Yi knew that if he didn't win, he wouldn't be able to protect his sister. Thanks to the pearl's effect, he didn't need to use his intellect to eliminate the insects attacking him from all sides. He was ready to bravely defend the crystal. Even though enemies came from every direction and his life was at risk, he needed to ensure victory. He defeated ant after ant. The number of corpses only grew, but it seemed endless. When Liu Yi's health dropped almost to zero, he used a healing spell, allowing him to continue the battle without losing strength. Meanwhile, Jack managed to kill some ants. He noticed the protagonist's health was low, but to his surprise, Liu Yi quickly healed himself. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. He thought Liu Yi was using rare potions and shouted that it didn't matter. Jack believed that if he just dodged, he could outlast Liu Yi. Liu Yi didn't pay any attention to Jack, focusing on killing the creatures surrounding him. Jack kept shouting that Liu Yi would pay for his arrogance, but Liu Yi, smiling, replied that Jack should worry about his own survival. He could easily destroy the monsters and somehow handle the situation. So Liu Yi commented that even if Jack begged for mercy, it wouldn't save him. These words infuriated Jack even more. He couldn't believe that even in such a desperate situation, Liu Yi was so confident and bold in making such statements. Jack, staying alert, noticed an ant trying to attack him from the side, so he instantly killed it. Meanwhile, Liu Yi continued eliminating an impressive number of monsters. His health was reduced to a minimum again, but he used his healing ability once more, continuing his relentless fight. Hours passed as he slaughtered ants with no fear in his eyes. There was only a field of corpses around him, but the creatures didn't stop attacking the crystal. Jack, off to the side, watched the massive number of dead monsters and couldn't believe what he was seeing. He thought it was impossible for Liu Yi to have so many healing potions. The amount he had used far exceeded what any player could carry for such a challenge. While Jack was staring at the pile of bodies, he didn't notice when a monster suddenly appeared. It grabbed his hand and caused massive damage. His health dropped to the minimum again. He wanted to quickly use a healing potion, but when he opened his inventory, he saw it was empty. This confused him, and he realized this was the end. His health was at its lowest, and enemies surrounded him from all sides. He no longer had the strength to keep fighting. The monster began tearing him apart, attacking him relentlessly, injuring every possible part of his body. Even in such a desperate situation, Jack still refused to accept the fact that he would die first and wouldn't get to see Liu Yi die before him. But as he looked at the hero, he realized that Liu Yi was still handling all the enemies, killing them without much trouble. He decided that Liu Yi would pay for his insolence as soon as he died and returned to the lobby. The young man continued watching everything with a smile on his face because he wasn't even slightly tired and still had plenty of strength. He actually enjoyed facing all the monsters attacking him. After all, that was how he gained experience and combat skills. At that moment, Jack was sent to the lobby with his level reset. A notification appeared on the protagonist's screen, indicating that only one person remained on his team himself. By fulfilling all the conditions, the dungeon completion reward would be increased tenfold. After several hours of fighting the insects, the hero crouched on the ground, exhausted and trying to catch his breath. An impressive number of defeated ants surrounded him, all eliminated by him, and finally the wave of attacks ceased. The insects stopped attacking him, and looking at the mountain of bodies, he felt relieved. He knew that before the second wave, the ants would disappear. If that didn't happen, he wouldn't know where the crystal was and wouldn't be able to protect it. Not far from him, he saw an item called the Golden Orb. The Golden Orb allowed the player to receive 3 random items from the inventory of a dead player. As soon as he saw the orb, Liu Yi quickly stood up with a smile on his face. He couldn't believe he had actually found the Golden Orb just as he had hoped from the mirror copy manager. Finally, he had done something right. Approaching the Golden Orb, the protagonist picked it up and thought for a moment, knowing he didn't have much combat strength left. He would have about 10 minutes to rest, which would restore half of his strength. Naturally, that wouldn't be enough for him, since he was in the third and final wave. Now he realized that he shouldn't have attacked the bugs so early. He should have waited for the last wave. All he could do now was hope the Golden Orb would bring something valuable to help him face the final wave. Upon speaking the words to open the Golden Orb, a notification appeared before him, offering a choice between equipment and items. Liu Yi began to think logically, considering that his strength, agility, and armor would soon reach 100 points. He wondered if he could get equipment that would enhance these 3 attributes and increase his combat skills, so he selected the equipment option. Immediately, a notification appeared stating that the system was opening the orb and the equipment would be extracted. He received a set of purple and gray ember equipment, which granted him 10 agility and 5 perception. The exact same second ring fell into the protagonist's right hand. The third item he obtained was a purple-class pendulum pistol, which gave him 200 strength and 30 wisdom. It also gave the skill to lock on, in addition to tripling the damage of each attack or stunning the target. The pistol also had an automatic reload feature, but took 1 minute to fully recharge. Liu Yi was in shock, unable to believe what he was seeing. To him, it was simply incredible. He believed it was his lucky day since he not only received buffs for all his equipment but also enhanced his main weapon. Accessing his stats, the protagonist noticed that 4 of his attributes had surpassed 100 points, which made him very happy. That meant his combat skills were stronger than ever. After thinking for a bit, Liu Yi realized that if it weren't for those who had attacked him, he wouldn't have become this strong, so he decided to thank them. The protagonist thanked them with a smile on his face. He was ready to enter battle knowing he was only behind in terms of level. But as soon as he protected the crystal from that dungeon, he would reach the top players. Now we are transported to the city at night, where we find ourselves in a room where players are revived after falling in battle. Jack stood in the middle of the room talking to his boss. Lowering his head, he said that Liu Yi definitely had some kind of secret that allowed him to have attributes exceeding his level. After everything that had happened, Jack claimed that if this weren't true, he wouldn't have perished at the protagonist's hands. He told his boss that even if he didn't believe him, he should understand the complexity of the Ruined Kingdom dungeon. A level 28 player clearing a level 35 dungeon alone was too much, and there was definitely something wrong. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to eliminate everyone. The boss, looking at Jack with disdain, said he was giving him one more chance. In a few days, he needed to level up, and the boss would personally deal with Liu Yi, sending others to handle him. Jack thanked the leader for giving him another chance and said he would try. Now we return to reality to an unknown cafe where Yan was yelling at Neon because her entire family was playing the game. The girl said that not only were they playing, but they were also making a lot of money, which surprised Yan. Nyan had trouble understanding why, but her parents forced her to level up with them every day. She was already tired and didn't want to do it anymore. Although her parents wanted Neon to keep playing, she wanted to do it her own way. Suddenly the girl stood up and asked Yan why she and her brother didn't play with her at her house in that cultivation game, saying it would be fun to play with her brother. Yan was very surprised by the suggestion. She didn't have a device to play, but she suddenly realized this was her chance to bring Nyan and her brother together. If they played together, it would be a success, and all she had to do was leave the house under some pretext and let them be alone. This was her incredibly cunning plan, so she suggested they go to her house. Now return to the protagonist who had begun to face the third wave advancing toward him. He was defeating his opponents one after another. Liu Yi had never felt such strength as he did at that moment. When he put on the equipment, he felt every cell in his body develop, especially under pressure. It felt as if the blade in his hands became even lighter. His steps became faster and more agile, and the height of his jumps allowed him to rise above all the creatures around him. In those moments, he felt incredibly majestic among the crowd. Liu Yi noticed something that caught his attention, a creature that even confused him a little. But he didn't take his eyes off it for a second. He decided to launch his strongest attack, leaping down and destroying an entire horde of ants with a single strike. But that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. More strength, more experience, more skills. And more importantly, by destroying the ants, he wanted to reach places he had only been able to gaze at before. Then, the same creature he had noticed earlier appeared before him while he was above all the monsters. It was a level 35 spider boss. Without hesitation, the protagonist decided to finish it off once and for all. Suddenly, notifications began to appear in front of Liu Yi. The character received congratulations specifically for having cleared the dungeon along with rewards. He gained an impressive amount of experience, receiving 360,000, which was multiplied by 10. Additionally, the character received the title of Dungeon Defender. For each ally lost in the dungeon, the player's stats increased by 10%. Now his stats have become incredibly high. Upon reaching level 36, he had amassed an immense amount of experience. His attributes of damage, defense, stamina, strength, agility, endurance, intelligence, perception points for distribution, health, and cognitive power were astonishing. At level 30, he had been able to choose a development path. One of the options was Silence, a precise ability that, when used, reset all abilities by 5 seconds. The cost was 50 cognitive power points, and with each level up, the ability added 1 more second. The second development option was called Captivity, which bound the enemy to their starting point for 10 seconds. After defeating the monster, the character sat down, satisfied, unable to believe he had taken down such a powerful creature alone. Most importantly, he was thrilled by how much stronger he had become in just a few hours, something he himself found hard to believe. Now we shift to the real world, to the protagonist's house. This meant moving from virtual reality to actual reality. Liu Yi stepped onto the balcony to get some fresh air, reflecting on his actions and feeling proud of his current achievements. He was only waiting for the opportunity to enter the game again to make his sister as strong as he was so she could protect herself in the future. Suddenly, Liu Yi heard someone knocking on the door behind him. When he entered the room, he saw that his sister had returned home. The girl standing in the hallway was holding a device to enter the game. She said it had been very difficult to get the device, but she was lucky to have a wonderful friend, Nan, who had helped her obtain it. However, the device had caused her to lose connection. The girl entered the room and someone followed her. For a few seconds, Liu Yi was in shock. He couldn't believe his sister had managed to get a device to enter Yuan World. But then, his expression changed. He became incredibly happy because now she could play with him. Yan, with a huge smile on her face, said that since Nan had gotten the device for her, she should be properly thanked, which meant Nan would have to live with them. Nan, without hesitation, greeted Liu Yi, and he in turn couldn't believe it was really a device to enter Yuan World, which to him was amazing. However, at that moment, the girl felt ignored and was quite annoyed. Liu Yi grabbed the box and started asking how they had managed to get the device. To him, it wasn't particularly important. After all, what mattered most was that they now had the device. His sister frowned, unable to believe her brother wasn't even paying attention to the beautiful girl beside him and was instead focused on his toy, even knowing that the girl would now be living with them. At that moment, Nan was very surprised that some device could make Liu Yi so happy. Now we go back one day in time to an unknown level 40 dungeon, an immense forest under a bright moon surrounding the area. Several people were sitting around a campfire discussing the fact that if they entered the level 40 dungeon, they would surpass the second team. This would increase their profits. They also talked about an incredibly strong girl who had helped them find a village. This girl was part of the New Order group. Her team ranked third out of all the teams. Her name was Yi. Suddenly, a man named Xiaoyang approached her. He told her that she could request to join the first team after clearing the dungeon, which would accelerate her development. Confused, she didn't quite understand what he was talking about and completely ignored his approach. Next, one of the team members told the captain that if Yi left, they wouldn't be able to develop as quickly. They dismissed the man's concerns and began discussing how, if Yi left, the team would have no future. Besides, they had invested so much in her and couldn't just let her go, especially when they needed her the most. The captain took a deep breath and said they couldn't hold someone back because of their feelings. He believed that even if she reached the highest rank in the New Order, she wouldn't forget them. The captain decided to confirm this, and with a smile on his face, asked her directly. In response, he only saw Yi's smile. The participant holding his head in his hands realized that he couldn't simply wish her good luck as she moved on to new heights. Another teammate agreed with the captain's words, saying he was absolutely right. There was no reason to hold back Yi's progress, since they were simply too weak. Everyone began to say that if the girl struggled in the first team, they wouldn't be so willing to take her back. It was just like before when she had first joined the team. They had helped her with everything she needed. Everyone was incredibly kind to the girl, and in response she smiled, thanked them, called them her brothers, and said they had been very kind to her. Since they had been so kind, she wanted to ask for one last favor. After saying all that, she felt very embarrassed. Everyone around her was in shock, not understanding what she meant. A deadly silence followed. A few seconds later, a blinding light appeared. All the team members collapsed lifeless. Those who were still alive used healing abilities, but could not believe what they were seeing. White Shi, who had been with them all this time, had betrayed them. She wanted to become incredibly strong, but her level was not high enough, so she decided to activate the dungeon reward. This way, she would become the strongest player in Yuan World. The captain was furious with her after everything they had done for her. Was this how she repaid their kindness? White Shi laughed again and waved her hand, saying there was no need to be so angry. It was just a game, and they could revive and level up again at any time. The captain did not want to hear another word and told her to go to hell. She was an ungrateful creature, and he attacked her. White Shi easily dodged the bullets and reminded him that she had warned them many times. No matter how much they shot at her in Yuan World, bullet speed was limited. Therefore, bullets could not catch up to a player with over 100 agility points. Then she swiftly moved behind the captain and pierced his neck. White Shi coldly repeated that cold steel was an entirely different matter. It depended on the user attributes. Speed and damage were not limited, so she could kill the captain effortlessly. The next day, we are transported to a level 45 dungeon where 20 people are fighting a humanoid monster. The captain reported that several people had run out of healing items and asked if they had stocked up enough. The captain, known as Strikes from the New Order, was fighting with impressive strength. Everyone around him admired his skills. He was exceptionally skilled, but his strength had a drawback. He needed to wait a long time to accumulate enough power. However, once he reached full strength, even the biggest monsters posed no challenge. The captain was level 45, and next to him was Blazing Fire from the New Order, also known as Blazing, who was also level 45. During the fight, the captain noticed another player with similar power. He immediately questioned whether this player was an enemy or someone they could convince to join them. The master quickly responded that this player had killed the captain in charge of the Mirror Realm. This surprised Strikes so much that he scratched his head in disbelief. The captain then asked about a girl named White Shi and what she was up to. The scene then shifts to a forest outside the control zone. A girl stands at the edge of a cliff looking at her system screen. She received a personal message from Blazing Fire informing her that she needed to meet a new player, our protagonist, Dugamis Power. White Shi smiled with excitement as she read the message. It did not mention anything about killing or recruiting the player, but she knew that powerful players were rare. If she could recruit the protagonist into the guild, it would mean she was doing everything for the guild benefit. However, if she killed him, it would go against the guild development. The master, seeing this, did not care about the future of our protagonist and left the decision entirely up to her. The girl, valuing her worth, knew she had to prove her competence by either recruiting or eliminating the protagonist. After some reflection, she decided she would kill him. Hey everyone, did you enjoy the story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys. Meanwhile, at Liu Yi's house, he sat at the table in his room and devised an action plan for the game. He needed to level up his character and equipment to level 60, while also preparing a fortified camp in the real world before the apocalypse. In his previous life, he remembered that the highest level ever reached by a player was 60. If he could reach that level before the real-world domination, he would effectively become the strongest player. With that power, he could ensure his own safety and his sister. With the collapse of public order and resource scarcity, only the most powerful guilds would be able to restore balance. In that scenario, food became the most valuable currency. Therefore, it was essential to stock supplies and establish a secure camp for him and his sister. With the funds available, he decided to rent a neighboring building, while the remaining money would be invested in buying rice and canned food. Now, he just had to wait for the supplies to arrive. In the game, his level was only 36, still far from his goal. To reach the maximum, he just needed to avoid dying and keep accumulating resources in the real world. That way, he and his sister could live in peace after the domination. When he entered the game with his sister and her friend, he led them to the weapon pavilion. He explained that in the UN, world strength was the most important skill. Its foundation lay in weapon practice. To maximize growth, it was essential to master different types of weaponry and thus awaken their true power. His sister analyzed the spear while he reminded Nianshu that skill without chi was useless. Therefore, they should practice with all weapons until they reach their full potential. Currently, Nianshu was at level 32. Both agreed with the plan. After that, Liu Yi walked toward the exit, and while observing them, reflected on how his actions had changed the course of history. In his past life, Nianshu never came to his house. He did not believe his interference had anything to do with her bringing the device to Liu Yan. In the past, thanks to Nianshu, he and his sister survived for 3 whole years. Now he felt it was his turn to repay the favor. With this determination, he ran out of the pavilion, and as he jumped with joy, he felt he was getting closer and closer to his goal, reaching level 60. Half a day later, Liu Yi emerged from a level 35 dungeon, now at level 37. One of his team members, smiling, commented on his impressive strength. He said that Liu Yi could clear a dungeon designed for 10 players all by himself. Another teammate agreed, mentioning that without him, the group would have had a much harder time. Excited, they decided to face the dungeon again, but Liu Yi refused as he still had other priorities. The players, disappointed, insisted that he add them as friends and promised to call him next time. He smiled, scratched the back of his head, and agreed. However, upon returning to the team search room, he clenched his fists nervously, reflecting on a major problem. Clearing a level 35 dungeon designed for 10 players took at least half a day, maybe even a whole day. The experience gained there amounted to half a level. If he continued at this pace in 20 days before the real-world domination, he would only reach level 50. Reaching 60 would be impossible. Sitting alone in the empty hall, he pondered over his first experience clearing that dungeon. That was when he received the title of Dungeon Protector and realized there was only one solution. By sacrificing 9 teammates, he could maximize his experience. In his previous life, such dungeons were called slaughterhouses, and players who resorted to this method were known as street rats. If he followed this path, he would become one of them. However, he wondered if that was the only alternative. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a notification. A system window appeared before him announcing a new message. Upon opening it, he saw an invitation to a dungeon. It was a level 40 expedition for 10 people. Reading the familiar name, he was surprised. Then the surprise turned into joy. Standing up from the bench, he exclaimed that this was the girl who in his past life became the strongest fighter. Liu Yi wondered why she would suddenly invite him to a dungeon. If he accepted, he would have a unique opportunity to evolve quickly. A confident smile appeared on his face. Besides, she was a member of the New Order. In the past, he had never met her under such circumstances, so he was sure she was plotting something against him. His legs trembled for a moment, but his eyes remained firm. Only the dungeon would allow him to grow. With that in mind, he made his decision. He accepted the invitation. The team list was displayed before him. All players had levels ranging from 37 to 45. Seeing the familiar names on the list, Liu Yi smiled upon noticing Lin Fei. He remembered that in his previous life, he had received the Desperate Situation reward after completing the task entirely. Before that, he had destroyed all of his comrades. He recalled how his former teammates had slandered him in the general chat. The girl with the nickname Cookie had a similar story, but in her case, she was harassed by other players. In the end, she ended up killing everyone in self-defense. The other team members had similar pasts. The team for this dungeon had been carefully selected by Wei Axi herself. Liu Yi touched his chin thoughtfully and pondered how Wei Axi could have known that those players were problematic. After joining the group, a chat became available, and he informed everyone that since they were all gathered, they should set off. Wei Axi sent a location on the map where they should meet. Lin Fei, upon seeing the new member, questioned Wei Axi and her choice, doubting whether he was really the player she had mentioned and why he was still at level 37. Wei Axi replied that in the team levels did not matter, because strength was the most important thing. Liu Yi opened the map and noticed that most of the members were in Maku City, while the rest were either in the uncontrolled area or on their way there. His expression grew serious as he analyzed the situation. The uncontrolled zone was a dangerous place. The controlled territories of Maku City were divided into 5 zones. Maku City served as a resource replenishment point for all players. All dungeons within the city were under control and had been modified long ago to become beginner-level dungeons and larger challenges. The especially dangerous zone was designated for players seeking extreme challenges. The controlled danger zone was fully modified and all creatures were sealed within the city. He had already gone into one of these dungeons with Chicken Crown. The Chaos Zone was a deadly territory. The influence of Muk City over the dungeons there was minimal. Creatures above level 30 roam freely outside the dungeons. The out-of-control zone was even worse. Players would almost immediately die upon entering. Their creatures above level 70 wandered. Finally, in the zone of destruction, Muk City had no control over this area. The creatures from the dungeons there could not be sealed. Monsters at the maximum level were capable of annihilating everything. After some time, Liu Yi was already in the uncontrolled area, approaching the meeting point. He was running quickly through the forest when suddenly he heard a scream. He turned, trying to identify who might have been screaming. Moments later, monsters made of branches and leaves emerged into a clearing in the forest. Seeing them, he crouched behind a nearby rock and watched as the creatures rushed toward the stream, releasing vines along the way. He realized that the monsters were not very strong individually, but their numbers were a problem. A single sound could attract them in successive waves. That scream could only have come from a careless player. After a few moments, silence returned. Liu Yi peeked out and confirmed that the monsters had moved away. He hesitated, wondering if the player who screamed was still alive. Jumping out of his hiding spot, he was convinced that he should keep moving. He continued toward the meeting point, but out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something approaching. A spear tip was flying straight at him. He reacted just in time, grabbing the weapon in midair and leaning back to dodge the strike. The attacker advanced, and Liu Yi tried to figure out who it was. The opponent gripped the spear firmly and attacked again, but Liu Yi managed to dodge. Now he was looking directly into the face of his opponent, whose eyes burned with excitement. Liu Yi drew his katana and counterattacked. The enemy held their weapon with both hands, blocking the blade with the tip of the spear. Then they smiled. The impact caused a loud bang, sending dust and leaves flying around them. After a few seconds of silence, they remained face to face, analyzing each other. Liu Yi and the player who had attacked him showed satisfaction with the fight. It seemed he had understood why Liu Yi had been chosen by the captain. Liu Yi frowned. After a moment of hesitation, Lin Fei, still smiling, acknowledged that his strength was not comparable to that of Liu Yi, but he believed he had earned some respect from him. Before leaving, he emphasized that they needed to get to the meeting point quickly, or else they could be surrounded by monsters. With that, he left without further delay. Only then did Liu Yi lower his katana and watch as Lin Fei walked away. He recognized that this player possessed true power, and there was a great chance that Wang Hai also had this strength. The team was incredibly strong. It was still unclear whether anyone there would be able to obtain the reward for the desperate situation, but the chance of dying in that dungeon remained very high. However, after some time, he arrived at the meeting point where the others were already waiting for him. As he approached the portal, he hesitated upon noticing a girl sitting on a nearby rock, smiling at him. She stood up, clapped her hands to get the attention of everyone, and announced that before entering the dungeon, she wanted to say a few words. The protagonist observed the team members around him, recognizing that he was now part of that group, even if he was not entirely sure about it yet. The captain took the floor and explained that the dungeons in the uncontrolled zone were extremely unpredictable. For this reason, the first action upon entering should be to understand its rules. It is important to do this, no matter how unusual they might seem. He reinforced that everyone needed to remain calm and discuss the plan rationally, as this would be the key to completing the mission. The players agreed with his words, and the girl approved of the attitude of the group, before leading them to the portal, stating that they would move forward. As the others advanced, the protagonist hesitated for a moment, recalling his previous uncertainties. He reflected on his feelings, and realized that ever since he met YXD considered the strongest player, he had begun to doubt his own abilities. He did not know if his uneasiness was insecurity, nervousness, or simply the fear of never measuring up to them. He also feared failing and seeing his efforts go to waste. However, instead of letting these doubts consume him, he lifted his gaze to the moon, shining above the forest. He took a deep breath and moved forward, determined to prove his worth. As soon as they crossed the portal, images began to appear before their eyes, narrating the dungeon story. A doll lamented that her companion no longer wanted to play with her. Sitting against the wall, unconscious, was the woman she used to have fun with. Without showing emotion, the doll stated that if her friend no longer wanted to play, she would find another toy. The hallways then filled with corpses. The one responsible for that scene, a small blood-stained mechanical doll, expressed boredom and said that her old companion had been the most fun. Now, with no one left, she had to go home. However, she lowered her head and murmured to herself that it was no longer possible. The cutscene ended, and the players found themselves at the top of the circular tower. In the center, atop a pedestal, was the same blood-stained doll. At the base of the structure, an inscription read, "Hope and despair coexist." The team was still trying to understand what they had just witnessed. When one of the players questioned what kind of dungeon they had entered, another team member agreed that this was unlike anything they had seen before. They stepped away from the portal, and one of the players commented that the unpredictability of dungeons, their maps, and challenges made the meta world both terrifying and fascinating. Another added that the most distressing part was knowing that some dungeons were impossible to cross without losing lives in the process. Observing the pedestal, they concluded that the only entity present was the doll. This indicated that she might be the key to understanding this place. However, before they could react, the figure vanished. Immediately, the system notified all players the dungeon entrance had been sealed. To escape, they needed to complete the mission titled Puppet Tricks. The dungeon required the players to destroy the doll. A marionette would appear in the backpack of one team member, and the task of the others would be to eliminate the marionette's owner. The dungeon would only be completed if the player with a marionette survived for 6 hours. If time ran out, the mission would fail. According to the rules, the marionette's owner could transfer it to another player. This would happen if they managed to kill one of their allies. Upon reading the mission description, the protagonist was surprised. He thought that this dungeon seemed to have been designed specifically for those who sought rewards in desperate situations. The mission stated that if the player passed the marionette to the last survivor, they would have a 100% chance of obtaining the highest reward. The system announced that the marionette had appeared and that the countdown had begun. Liu Yi immediately decided to check his backpack to make sure he wasn't the one holding the toy. However, as he opened the system window, he paused and reflected. It wasn't the right time to do this. He knew that once the other players calmed down, he would need to check if he had the marionette. If he did, he would have to decide whether to hand it over, but doing so would make him a target for everyone else. Facing two powerful fighters was not an ideal situation, and his chances of survival would drop drastically. The other players began looking at each other suspiciously, and the atmosphere grew tense. Liu Yi noticed that everyone seemed to be watching the person beside them. Perhaps they were hiding, or maybe they were in the same situation as him. It was then that Y clapped her hands, drawing the group's attention. Liu Yi turned his gaze toward her, as Y smiled and spoke. She suggested that since everyone knew the mission's objective, the player with the marionette should surrender, allowing their death to be certain. She proposed that each of them would contribute a portion of the reward, distributing it fairly. Y then asked if all the players who did not have the marionette in their backpack agreed with the idea. Most players nodded in agreement with her proposal. Seizing the distraction, the protagonist saw an opportunity to quickly check his backpack while everyone was focused on her. He opened the system window and examined his inventory. However, his eyes widened in shock. He had just discovered that the marionette was in his backpack. He thought to himself that he had just joined the team and they had already placed that marionette in his possession as a gift. He frowned as he looked at his inventory once more, and then observed the other players. His main objective now was to eliminate one of the team members so that the puppet would transfer to someone else. He needed to get rid of the imminent threat, but he still didn't know who he should choose as his target. Even if he handed over the puppet, he would struggle to fight against two powerful players who would certainly show no mercy. Without waiting for a response, one of the players asked if anyone wanted to confess. Liu Yi remained silent, lowering his gaze, but was soon surprised by the team captain, who approached and stared directly at him. With a confident smile, he stated that it was time for him to admit that he had the puppet. Liu Yi was shocked by the sudden accusation, but he quickly regained his composure, assuming a serious expression. As he processed the captain's words, one of the female players mentioned his name. She said she liked standing out and then demanded that he talk about himself. Liu Yi, however, remained rigid and silent. He looked at the other team members again, noticing that they were all smiling in a peculiar way. The memory of the exchanged glances between them sparked growing suspicion within him. Gradually, he realized that even without directly analyzing each other's reactions, they had found a way to confirm that he had the puppet. They were all working together. Upon understanding the situation, Liu Yi let out a laugh. Everything seemed obvious now. A sudden invitation to such a strong team was nothing more than a disguised test. Still not fully understanding the reason for the woman's hostility toward him, he concluded that this dungeon had been specifically designed to eliminate him. The large number of players gathered there was proof of that. He cast an evaluating look at the female player analyzing the situation and concluded that, by inviting him to complete the dungeon, they had signed his death sentence. After all, the only reward in that desperate situation belonged to him. His smile widened as he began to understand the game they were trying to impose on him. The woman in turn commented that he was rude but that it didn't bother her. Liu Yi had already demonstrated his strength, but he was still far from being a match for the rest of the team. They wasted no time with unnecessary discussions. The sooner they finished the battle, the quicker they could move on to a new level up. Faced with this, he simply agreed. That was when Lin Fei shouted, offering him a chance to defend himself. For him, this would make the fight more interesting. After all, they wanted to destroy his hopes little by little. Wei Xia, on the other hand, covered her face with her hands and lamented how cruel they were being. However, she soon lowered her hands, revealing a sly smile. With a sharp look, she stated that Liu Yi shouldn't force them to act that way. Without hesitation, Liu Yi quickly switched his equipment for a pendulum and aimed the weapon at her. However, he hesitated before firing. Wei Xia observed his hesitation and concluded that he didn't want to act rashly. She also realized that he wasn't even aware of when he was being spared. The other team members, upon seeing the weapon he was holding, reacted with scorn, exchanging insults among themselves. In their view, they should have been more cautious. After all, a fool who fired without thinking wouldn't stand a chance against opponents like them. Lin Fei smiled. He pondered that if they had been warned about Liu Yi, it was because he must have some kind of special ability. Perhaps his shots had the ability to trap his enemies. The other players laughed, commenting that he knew how to play within the metaverse. Magical traps were well-known tricks in that world. One of the allies suggested they take the situation seriously because, in the metaverse, it was possible to create traps. This specific type of technique was what they called a cage. Wei Xia laughed again, clearly enjoying the situation. Liu Yi then smiled and activated his capture ability. Wei Xia's smile immediately disappeared, and she jumped back, stopping a few meters away. She looked at herself. Upon realizing she was still unharmed, she tried to hide her nervousness. For an instant, she shuddered and called out to Lin Fei, warning him that they shouldn't play around with Liu Yi. She realized it would be safer to attack him together to end that confrontation as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Liu Yi continued smiling, satisfied that he had trapped Lin Fei inside the cage. The imprisoned players struggled to break free, but the chains remained firm. The other team members reacted with surprise, exclaiming in shock at what had happened. Even Wei Xia stared at her companion, incredulous at the scene before her eyes. It was at that moment that Liu Yi used his special pistol ability called Lock Up. The technique allowed him to choose between tripling the damage or stunning the target. He opted to increase the damage, and immediately the system informed him that 100 knowledge points had been consumed. His next attack would deal 5,000 damage. With his eyes shining with determination, he raised his gun and aimed directly at Lin Fei. Without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. The bullet cut through the air, heading straight for the immobilized player. The bullet pierced through Lin Fei's body, opening a massive hole in his stomach. He lost all his health points and collapsed to the ground. The system notified that Liu Yi had eliminated Lin Fei and successfully transferred the puppet to another player. With the death of a team member, the title of Dungeon Defender was activated. This increased all his stats by 10%. Additionally, he received a pearl as a reward for the kill. Meanwhile, the other team members stared at their fallen companion, shocked by what had just happened. Liu Yi, on the other hand, was reflecting on his situation and his greatest fear. There were two possible scenarios that could lead to his death. The first possibility was facing White Seth and Lin Fei together in a direct attack. The second, even more dangerous, was the presence of a fourth member on the team, someone with an unknown power. Assessing the available information, he realized that within that team, only White Hai and Lin Fei were strong enough to face him. That meant the real danger lay in the first option. His opponents had been overly confident because they underestimated his strength. Thanks to that mistake, he had managed to eliminate Lin Fei, breaking the balance of the strongest duo. Now that he had significantly reduced the threat, he only needed to take down the rest of the team. A smile formed on his face as he realized that victory was within his reach. Although the ideal strategy had been to eliminate Yexia first, she had managed to dodge the shot at the last moment. This was due to her heightened perception, a trait that gave her an advantage in fast-paced combat. Liu Yi then issued a direct warning to the team. He informed them that the puppet had passed to one of them. If they wanted to protect their ally, they needed to act immediately. Otherwise, he would destroy the puppet, eliminating any chance of revenge. Aware that the team was weakened, he knew he had to be cautious to secure his victory and claim the dungeon's reward. His next step would be to identify the player who had the puppet in their inventory and hold on to it until the end. The team captain, upon hearing this, cursed loudly before freezing in place. The realization of the immediate danger made her spin around toward the group and order everyone to stay still. She knew that Liu Yi was trying to find out who had the puppet. The other team members, visibly nervous, formed a circle around one of them, attempting to hide them. The player at the center, frightened instinctively, took a step back. Liu Yi noticed her reaction and smiled, realizing he had found his target. The terrified look in her eyes confirmed his suspicion. He understood that at that moment, she was completely cornered. Without wasting time, he propelled himself forward and activated his ability, increasing his stats by 200%. He dashed directly toward his target, determined to eliminate anyone who tried to stop him. With his katana in hand, he cut through the players in his path. Their resistance was insignificant. The system notified that he had defeated 6 opponents. This increased his stats by 70%. Some of his attributes surpassed the 1,000-point mark. As a reward for the kills, he received new pearls, equipment, and items. Faced with the carnage, Yexia charged at him furiously. She wielded her dagger and tried to strike. Liu Yi, however, reacted quickly, blocking the attack with a precise movement of his weapon. Meanwhile, one of the players, nicknamed Cookie, trembled with fear and collapsed to the ground, unable to react. The team captain, noticing his condition, exclaimed that Cookie was still alive but had the puppet. That meant Liu Yi was aiming for the dungeon's reward. Surprised by his audacity, the captain mocked him, but Liu Yi only responded with a smile. Her boots gleamed as she activated her arcane jump ability. This allowed her to move quickly to the side. She warned her opponent that he had made a mistake by choosing her as his target. With almost imperceptible speed, she began to circle around him. Liu Yi remained alert, realizing that, in an instant, she had simply vanished from his line of sight. Before he could react, Yexia appeared behind him, ready to strike. However, anticipating her movement, he turned and swung his katana in her direction. Yexia, being more agile, dodged again and reappeared behind him, landing a punch. Without giving him space to recover, she continued attacking repeatedly. This drastically reduced Liu Yi's health. He then activated his recovery ability instantly, restoring his health bar. Next, he raised his blade over his opponent. To Yexia's surprise, the damage she had inflicted was 9,000 points, equivalent to 75% of his total health. She recognized that she was facing an absurdly resilient opponent. The clash of blades echoed loudly. Confident, Yexia stated that at this rate, he would run out of healing potions before the battle ended. That would guarantee her victory. Liu Yi, however, simply smiled. Without hesitation, Yexia switched weapons and executed a sudden attack. The strike was devastating, reducing his life by 9,800 points. But just like before, Liu Yi restored his health in an instant. Stunned, Yexia tried to make sense of what was happening. She knew that the level 30 instant recovery potion only restored 1,000 health points, and that each player could only carry 10 vials inside the dungeon. However, Liu Yi had already regenerated more than 19,000 points in total. It did not make sense. As she tried to comprehend the situation, she failed to notice Liu Yi's sudden movement. He advanced with a powerful punch, striking her forcefully. Then, with a smile on his face, he apologized. Liu Yi confidently declared that the only winner there was him. Yexia gritted her teeth, dodging at the exact moment he attacked again. He watched her with a displeased look as she quickly retreated, stopping beside Cookie. That was when she made an observation. Given Liu Yi's enormous health pool, she was convinced that he possessed support abilities. Liu Yi smiled at her deduction and responded. Bai Shi, on the other hand, had invested all her distribution points into dexterity. Besides her strength in close combat, her speed had reached an abnormal level, and her attacks almost always resulted in critical hits. For a brief moment, her expression grew serious. Then, forcing a smile, she admitted that because of this, her knowledge stat was extremely low. This now left her completely exhausted. She reflected that she was probably out of options. Maybe the best thing to do was simply kill Cookie and end the confrontation once and for all. Liu Yi immediately became cautious. He thought that somehow he had overestimated his own strength to the point of forcing her to consider such an extreme option. Bai Shi was far too fast. If she wanted to, she could have killed Cookie hundreds of times before he could even react. But if she knew she couldn't defeat Liu Yi directly, why was she still hesitating? Her behavior seemed contradictory. Liu Yi then asked what exactly she was waiting for. If Cookie was still alive, that meant it wasn't time to celebrate just yet. The system notified that the enhancement of all stats had been completed. Additionally, the pendulum and captivity ability had fully recharged. His eyes widened, and without wasting time, he aimed his weapon at Bai Shi to activate his ability. However, suddenly his body froze in place. Confusion took over his mind. What was happening? Before he could understand, Cookie delivered a fatal blow to the team captain. Bai Shi looked at Liu Yi with a confident smile. The truth was revealed in the following seconds. Moments earlier, Bai Shi had instructed Cookie to kill her and then take his own life, ensuring that Liu Yi wouldn't be able to claim victory. She had promised her teammate double the reward if he followed the plan. and that was exactly what he did. After striking her, Cookie killed himself. Their bodies began to fade away. Liu Yi remained still, stunned by what had just happened. It was unbelievable. Baishi laughed loudly before disappearing completely, calling Liu Yi a loser and declaring that he had lost. When their bodies vanished entirely, Liu Yi was left alone in the dungeon. He took a step back, still confused until his legs gave out and he collapsed to the ground. His mind swirled with questions. How did this happen? Why? Upon checking his inventory, he realized that the puppet had returned to him. That realization hit him hard. The entire fight had been completely nullified. Why would Bai Xi do something like that? Was it all just to deny him a possible victory? To him, it was ridiculous. He grabbed his own head in frustration, trying to understand what he should do. Both of them were dead, and now the puppet was with him. If Bai Xi hadn't killed herself, and he had managed to defeat her, the puppet would have completed its journey in his inventory. Now, with no players remaining, all that was left was to wait for his own death. The chance to change everything had been lost so easily. He should have won. A loud, desperate scream echoed through the dungeon. After a while, his breathing stabilized. He lay on the ground trying to catch his breath. Staring at the ceiling, he murmured to himself that there had to be another way. If all his allies were dead, then Yuan World wouldn't just let him lose like that. That meant there had to be another method to get around this situation. He got up and looked around, trying to think of all the possibilities. Then he decided to explore the room, determined to find an escape. Upon reaching the edge of the platform, Liu Yi extended his hand and felt something invisible in front of him. He quickly realized it was a transparent wall. After analyzing his surroundings, he concluded that the special dungeon's territory was limited to the size of that cylindrical platform. After another careful inspection of the area, he approached the central pedestal. With the doll in hand, he climbed onto the pedestal and cautiously paused, evaluating every detail around him. Soon, his eyes landed on a plaque engraved with an intriguing message. Hope and despair exist together. Upon closer examination, he noticed a scratch marking just below the main inscription. As he moved closer, he realized that something was written in small letters. Running his fingers over the surface of the stone, he managed to decipher the words carved there. "I can't open the door." As he touched the inscription, he felt the slab beneath his hand give way slightly. A distinct sound of a mechanism being activated echoed through the air. At that moment, the system notified him that he had found the entrance to the Cognition Research Institute. A new piece of information appeared before him. To open the membrane, 1,000 cognition points were required. Liu Yi furrowed his brows upon seeing the required amount. It was a significant sum, especially considering that his energy was already compromised due to the effects. Even though he had a strength stat exceeding 1,500, his last battle had left him with just over 1,000 cognition points. He wasn't sure how to obtain more within that environment. By spending 700 points to increase all his abilities, by 350, he would reach the 1,000 cognition points needed to open the membrane. That way, he would still have a positive balance of over 300 points. Considering that he was about to enter unknown territory, he decided it was best to be fully prepared for combat. Confirming his choice, the system registered the action. All of his abilities were increased by 350 points. The 700 cognition points were consumed. The remaining 1,000 points were used to open the membrane. At that very moment, the pedestal before him transformed into a door. A strong gust of wind blew against his face. Suddenly, a male voice called his name. The tone of the voice carried urgency, urging him to make a decision quickly. The voice mentioned the need to choose between two options: display what followed him, or dissolve and map everything. Leo blinked, confused, unable to fully grasp the situation. The man insisted, warning that the choice had to be made immediately, so that his computational power could be activated. Feeling lost, Leo tried to find some logic in it. What exactly did these options mean? And what would be the consequences of making the wrong choice? He analyzed the context. If this was a fixed system test, then they were probably on the brink of a great disaster. The key point seemed to be the concept of computational power. He pondered whether displaying this power meant ensuring his own survival, or if it was merely a tool that could be used to escape the impending catastrophe. Reflecting on his past life, he realized he had never come this far to face a dilemma like this. If the goal was to ensure his own survival and that of his sister, the most logical option was to display what followed him. However, if the only way to avoid disaster was through an external resource, then the safest path was to dissolve and map everything. Leo knew that if disaster was inevitable, the only way to face it was to be prepared for the consequences. He also considered that the purpose of mapping computational power might be related to selecting individuals with certain qualities. But how could he be sure he was making the right choice? By the end of his reflection, he concluded that he needed to ensure that the Forgotten Ones had access to perfect computational power. After all, only a few were able to return to the characteristic of imagination. If the First World had never emerged, players would never have evolved to the level they were at now. Convinced that this was the best possible decision, Leo chose to dissolve and map everything. The moment he confirmed, his choice sparks appeared before his eyes. He held his breath, waiting for the result. However, as soon as the light faded, he realized he was in the exact same place. His body remained still for a few seconds until he finally furrowed his brows and looked around. Nothing had changed. The conclusion was inevitable. He had chosen the wrong option. Leo sat down and crossed his arms over his chest, contemplating whether the correct answer was to focus on revealing who was following him. He still had 350 cognition points remaining. Because it was a parasite in his body, the puppet kept him in constant battle, making cognition recovery extremely slow. Even so, with the 5 hours left, he would be able to accumulate 1,000 points and have the opportunity to take the test twice. That would be enough. All he had to do was wait. He closed his eyes and prepared to endure. After an hour and a half, the system notified him that he had accumulated 700 cognition points. He abruptly opened his eyes, accelerated his recovery, and spent 1,000 points to activate the membrane. Once again, he was presented with the same two options. Focus on displaying who was following him, or dissolve and map everything. Leo was about to click on the first option, but hesitated at the last moment. If a test was just about choosing between these options, then why couldn't he simply enter the research institute by making the correct choice? If the door blocked the puppet's passage, then he would never be able to enter that institute which he considered his home. Something was wrong. But what exactly? Was it a matter of the power of knowledge? Or perhaps it was related to some specific characteristic? The available information indicated that the puppet had left the institute due to its stubbornness, and now wished to return, but the door prevented it. Maybe it wasn't about making the right choice, but rather having the right attitude. Leo furrowed his brow, reflecting on this possibility. At the end of his analysis, he decided to trust his judgment and once again chose the second option. Once more, he returned to the platform. Nothing had changed. He had only one more attempt left. If he made a mistake, he would have to wait again. Even so, he still believed in himself. He sat down once again and waited. After an hour and a half, only 27 minutes remained before the task ended. When checking his cognition points, he saw that he had accumulated 700. Liu Yi opened his eyes, used the remaining points, and activated the membrane. This time, after choosing the second option, he immediately stepped back and felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. He jumped backward and saw the pedestal begin to descend. A satisfied smile appeared on his face as he exclaimed loudly that he had succeeded. The hardest part of the test was over. Now he was sure that the real challenge was not choosing the right option, but insisting on the validity of his choice. The door would only open if the same option was selected 3 consecutive times. In front of him, a staircase leading downward appeared. He observed the entrance to the research institute and concluded that the secret level was meant to be completed by a team. As he descended the steps, he realized that no one had ever completed this task the way he had. To do so, it was necessary to enhance all his skills, rely on pure wisdom, and activate a special counterattack. Without these upgrades, opening the door 3 times would have been impossible. At that moment, no one else would be able to access that hidden level. Liu Yi knew he had been very cautious. Even so, desperation could lead him to make risky decisions. Being bold, however, did not mean acting recklessly. If he had known before entering that his team was so unstable, he would not have made the mistakes that resulted in so many deaths. He walked down a long, empty, and well-lit corridor. At the end of the path, he found a door. In front of it lay a bloody corpse. As he approached, he noticed it was a woman. Suddenly, a glowing sphere appeared before him. Liu Yi looked at his own chest, surprised, and saw the sphere detach from him. It floated toward the corpse and merged with the body. Shortly after, the system notified him that the evil puppet had been purified. As a reward, Liu Yi received 1% of the membrane computing power. He sighed in relief. The system then announced that the achievement Desperate Situation had been unlocked, triggering a series of rewards. The system settings began to adjust. Overcome with emotion, Liu Yi felt his legs weaken and leaned against the wall. He stored his weapon in the inventory. His legs were shaking. A smile crossed his face as he realized he was genuinely afraid of death. He covered his face with his hand, feeling embarrassed by his reaction. The system informed him that the configuration was complete. He received 22,464 experience points and 400 coins. His level increased to 44. His HP bar increased to 3,720, and his knowledge power to 846. His combat power was now 898. 2 new skills were unlocked. Status Lock freezes the target health bar and prevents them from spending knowledge power. For every 10 levels, 1 second is added to the freeze duration. All skills applied to the target last for 10 minutes. Consumes 50 cognition points. For every 10 levels, the duration increases by 10 seconds. Liu Yi clenched his fists with excitement. He still could not believe what he had accomplished. He thought he had only defeated Ye, but in reality, he had overcome something much greater. He jumped into the air and exclaimed, laughing with joy. The dungeon began to disappear around him. Meanwhile, his sister and his friend had already mastered their weapon skills. The two exchanged glances satisfied. Wu Kai was waiting for Liu Yi at the player resurrection point. 6 hours had passed since she last saw him. He had not returned yet. She crossed her arms, worried, and wondered where he could be. Then Blazing Fire sent a message asking what had happened. Wu Kai responded with a single sentence: there was a death. Blazing Fire asked if Liu Yi was responsible. Wu Kai clarified that in fact she had died. For a moment, Blazing Fire was speechless. After a brief pause, she added that she had obtained valuable information. He wanted to know what he should do. Wu Kai instructed him to arrange a battle for her in the Mirror Realm. A single copy of Mirror would be enough to restore her level. Blazing Fire agreed. Finally, she mentioned that Liu Yi was the person he was looking for and that he possessed a special support power. Blazing Fire was sitting in his guild meeting room, frowning as he looked at the message from Wu Kai. The man sitting across from him said he knew how rare support power was and that he would help him in the Uncontrolled area. His nickname was Wuji level 45, and he used fists instead of weapons. Additionally, he also possessed support power. He stated that he had promised to help but would demand something in return: 10,000 coins. The guild president responded with a malicious smile, saying there was no problem. Wuji then left the headquarters of New Order, where his friend was already waiting for him. Upon seeing him, his friend excitedly asked how it had gone. Everyone was jumping for joy because they had searched all over the network to find the owner of the support power. Wuji ignored the excitement and frustratedly kicked a pole, making his friend flinch. After calming down a bit, he said he had arranged everything. His friend exclaimed that this was the first step of the plan and questioned the reason for his anger. Wuji crouched down and shouted loudly, irritated, because he had discovered that he was not the only player with support power. Now, they needed to rethink their plan to reach the top of New Order. Meanwhile, Liu Yi was sitting in his room, looking at a piece of paper where he had written down his thoughts. He was reflecting on the hash power permission, which represented the authority to control the computational output of a specific large machine. Then he wondered if the reward for upgrading the special dungeon was just the beginning of a grand mission, or had a deeper meaning. Liu Yi questioned what would happen upon reaching 100% computational power and the relationship between the hash power, permission, and the test. Rubbing the tip of his nose, he felt exhaustion taking over, but he knew he needed to keep thinking as his future depended on it. He decided to get up and leave his room to relax and take a bath before returning to the game. As soon as he opened the door and stepped into the hallway, he noticed Nayanu coming out of the bathroom drying her hair with a towel. Seeing him, she stopped and waved. He returned the wave with a smile and headed toward the bathroom, but before entering, he glanced at her. He thought there was always a pleasant aroma in the air whenever she was home. His face flushed slightly and he scratched his cheek in embarrassment. Suddenly, he slapped his own face, wondering what he was thinking. He needed to hurry and get into the game to set a goal for the next phase. After some time, he was already in the game and headed to the pavilion where equipment was created and sold. Standing at the terminal, he reflected on his situation. He was at level 44 and needed to gain 16 more levels to reach level 60. To do this, he would have to complete a special dungeon 32 times, which would take about 20 days. There were only 22 days left until Yuan World became a reality. Time was very short, and he might not be able to reach his goal in time. Additionally, he still had issues with his equipment. There were 2 ways to obtain melee equipment. The first involved using coins directly. The second consisted of upgrading lower-level equipment. At the moment, he had 11,021 coins. Of those, 6,750 were rewards for traveling to a special dungeon, and the rest came from dismantling equipment he did not use. The system asked if he wanted to create 40 purple-grade equipment pieces for 650 coins each. He could also upgrade his level 30 gear to level 40 for 400 coins. He realized he was still missing 3 pieces of equipment: a headpiece, a necklace, and an emblem. Combining 9 pieces with the remaining 40, he would spend 5,550 coins. The system reported that it would take 1,100 seconds to upgrade the purple-grade equipment. Liu Yi calculated that he would need 16,129 coins to reach level 60. This meant he would have to play more than 40 times what he had previously. He crossed his arms thoughtfully. If he wanted to reach his goal, he would have to take risks and seek extra rewards. But who should he target? Suddenly, a new message arrived, catching his attention. Before opening it, he hesitated for a moment, feeling a growing nervousness. News only tended to arrive in emergency situations. He told the system to open the message and saw that it was a private communication from the president of the New Order Guild. The message asked if he was available and if they could talk. The protagonist was surprised and remembered how in his previous life he had been kicked out by other players. He was told that someone like him had no place in New Order. After New Order established itself in the Middle World, they occupied the entire southern region of China and became the strongest guild in the world. They aimed to manage the elite, and as long as a person was elite or had special talents, their life directly depended on New Order. They treated low-level players without special talents like trash and oppressed them in every possible way. As someone who died in a previous life, he could say it was impossible not to hate New Order. He frowned and looked at the message, thinking that he was extremely weak back then. He wondered what was wrong. Blazing Fire wrote that he wanted to form a specialized team for the Uncontrolled zone, but so far they did not have enough people. He had heard that Liu Yi had support power, so he was inviting him to join the team. If Liu Yi had the means, he could discuss it and try to reach an agreement. Liu Yi asked if they were only missing a player with support power. Blazing Fire confirmed his words and Liu Yi became nervous. Then Blazing Fire wrote that, in other words, this was the strongest team in that world. He asked why they should go to an uncontrolled area. Blazing Fire said that he had his reasons. Liu Yi responded that he would think about it and write back to him later. After that, he wondered if he should agree. Although this team almost prevented him from gaining rewards for his madness, it allowed him to accumulate experience and coins much faster than a regular team. He wondered why he would go there. It was impossible to use the market's transfer gate to directly go to the secret territory. Additionally, there were several monsters above level 70 living there. He decided not to worry about it for now, and thought that he should improve his equipment first. The system reported that it would take 650 coins to create purple-grade equipment. Soon the upgrade was completed, and all the stats of his equipment improved. With that, his attack power increased to 9,900, defense to 716, intelligence to 678, while the rest ranged from 134 to 2,011. His health increased to 6,030, and his cognitive power increased to 234. His current combat power was estimated at 102. Since his combat power had surpassed 100, he was upgraded to a Supreme Space Hunter. The attribute level increased from +1 to +2. Because of that, the attack power increased to 11,400, defense to 892, resistance to 159, health to 8,040, and knowledge power to 2,712. The main character looked at the updated equipment and was very pleased, thinking that combat strength brought such cool improvements. After surpassing 100 attributes, the mark increased, and his strength was amplified by 30%. If he continued improving his combat effectiveness, he would be able to increase all other attributes as well. How much was necessary? 200, 100, or 1,000? He suddenly frowned while thinking about something else and diverted his gaze. He thought the Battle Force system could be activated as long as he had the power. But if he had such opportunities, then other players would too. The team was formed by the President of New Order. Such command is equivalent to a group of 10. The clones made going to the Uncontrolled zone a more viable possibility than it initially seemed. Liu Yi sent a message to Blazing Fire, informing him that he would join the team. The response came immediately, stating that his decision was reasonable. It was noted that the team already had a player with support power, ensuring there would be no risk for him. Additionally, Blazing Fire mentioned that Liu Yi would receive a reward of 100 coins. Liu was surprised. He didn't understand the reason for that generosity. It was evident that the leader was someone very rich, but he didn't seem to care about that detail. If there was any ulterior motive behind that act, at least he would have the benefit of securing enough money to eat. He passed on the information to the group, and the President of New Order soon replied, saying that there was no issue with it. Satisfied, Liu Yi noticed that he was now part of the team. The invitation to officially join the team was made and accepted without objections. After that, a message was sent in the general chat for the other members to greet the new member. Wu Ji showed interest, asking if this would be the second player with support power besides him. After a brief exchange of greetings, the president arranged a meeting at the North Gate. Before leaving, Liu Yi grabbed a knife and reflected on his preparation. He decided that it would be wise to remove the headpiece and bring a regular weapon with him. In case something unexpected happened, he would have a way to protect himself. Additionally, he thought it would be better to keep the knife hidden. The uncertainty of that new environment could jeopardize his safety. When he arrived at the North Gate, he examined the team member list. Almost everyone was at level 50 except for the 2 players in support power. Moving a little further, Liu Yi spotted a crowd gathered. Blazing Fire was among them, arms crossed with a disgusted expression. The other players seemed curious and were closely watching the arrival of the new member. Wu Ji noticed his presence first, turning to wave excitedly. Liu Yi walked up to him and gave a brief introduction. The greeting was returned with a smile. Blazing Fire broke the silence, commenting that he had never met anyone with support power before. Now he had 2 right in front of him. Before they left for the Uncontrolled zone, he said there was something he'd like to show everyone. Liu Yi observed him more carefully. The possibility that this was the President of New Order became more evident. If it were true, then he was in front of one of the most powerful people in that world. The president announced that before they set off, the two new members should demonstrate their abilities. The support players exchanged glances before Wu Ji stepped forward, offering to go first. Meanwhile, Liu Yi scratched the back of his neck, confused. It didn't make sense to have to prove his abilities there. The invitation to join the team had already been made. Still, the request was reinforced with the argument that the team would feel more confident about them. In light of this, Liu Yi nodded, understanding the reasoning behind the demand. Wu Ji then approached Blazing Fire and shared what he had learned about his own ability. He explained that the activation range of the power depended on the range of the weapon he used. To demonstrate, he raised his hand and explained that his gloves had an attack range of 1 to 2 meters. Because of this, if he was beyond that limit, his abilities wouldn't have an effect. Blazing Fire quickly understood, commenting that the relationship between the weapon and ability made sense. Liu Yi, in turn, was surprised by that revelation. If Wu Ji's gloves had such a short range and he himself used a gun, what would be the actual limit of his ability? He had never stopped to think about that before. His powers always worked without him needing to calculate the distance. Suddenly, he felt uneasy. While pondering that, Wu Ji began demonstrating his abilities. First, he activated a recovery power. Next, he used the second technique called mantra. He explained that this ability could be used against bosses, as it caused weakening, aging, and deceleration effects. Then he demonstrated the third ability, temporarily chaining the hands of the President of New Order. He informed them that this technique was called silence, capable of restricting any enemy, including bosses. To finish, he said he would leave his fourth ability as a trump card for more critical situations. Blazing Fire watched everything with a satisfied smile. Meanwhile, Liu Yi concluded that he would follow the same strategy. He revealed only 3 useful abilities to the team, keeping the fourth secret. When his turn came, he stepped forward and explained that he used a blade with a 3-meter attack range greater than Wu Ji's. He repeated the recovery ability demonstration, followed by the second technique called blessing. The third ability was prison. To demonstrate, he applied the technique to the president, who was completely immobilized. The ability was deactivated quickly, and Liu Yi explained that the effect lasted about 10 seconds, although he couldn't guarantee it would work on bosses. Additionally, he mentioned that the blessing could remove any negative condition, including his own prison. Just like Wu Ji, he kept his fourth ability secret. At the end of the demonstration, he exchanged a glance with Wu Ji. He noticed the confidence reflected in the other player's eyes. Blazing Fire absorbed all the information before declaring that he understood both of their capabilities. With that clarified, he announced that they could finally set off. Turning to the other members, he made an announcement. Due to the lack of players and support power, the group had always been limited to the peripheral areas of the uncontrolled zone. However, they now had 2 holders of this power. They could venture deeper into the region and explore its secrets. The players received his words with enthusiasm, raising their fists in a gesture of determination before departing. Liu Yi observed the scene and began to reflect. The rewards obtained from exploring the Chaos Zone and the Uncontrolled Zone were practically the same. However, the danger level was different. He wondered what made the Uncontrolled Zone special, and why the President of New Order insisted on exploring it if something hidden was there. His train of thought was interrupted when he realized he had stopped walking. Wu Ji noticed his hesitation and waved, catching his attention. Liu Yi resumed his steps, smiling at him before continuing to walk with the group. However, as he moved forward, his expression slowly turned serious. For him, there was only room for 1 support player in that team. It was only a matter of time before Wu Ji was eliminated. And when that happened, Liu Yi would be the only holder of that power in the team. When they arrived at the entrance of the Uncontrolled Zone, the players were faced with the decaying landscape that awaited them. Tall, ruined buildings sprawled everywhere, creating a dark and oppressive scene. The team captain took the lead, explaining the specifics of this area in comparison to the Chaos Zone and the Dangerous Zone. The main difference was that the difficulty in the Uncontrolled Zone was determined by the number of team members. For this reason, their group consisted of 10 people. However, even though this was the minimum number allowed, the difficulty was very high. It would still be equivalent to that of a squad made up of 80 combatants. Therefore, they had to remain vigilant at all times and never act recklessly. Additionally, the captain warned them that eliminating monsters in this region did not grant rewards. With that in mind, upon encountering them, the priority should be to find shelter immediately. If there was no safe place nearby, they should attempt to distract the monsters. If necessary, sacrificing some team members to ensure the survival of the others would be required. A heavy silence settled among the players after this declaration. Without further delay, the captain jumped ahead with swift agility, leaping from one of the buildings. Without hesitation, the other players followed suit, jumping after him. Liu Yi, on the other hand, crouched for a brief moment, analyzing the surrounding environment. Then he propelled himself forward and also jumped. As he neared the ground, he noticed that the darkness thickened around him. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he lifted his gaze to the sky. A lightning bolt illuminated the horizon between the destroyed buildings. When he glanced to the side, he spotted the rest of the team members, and close to them a monster perched atop a semi-destroyed building. The creature, upon noticing the players, let out a deafening roar. Liu Yi frowned, assessing the situation. Blazing Fire, maintaining his composure, ordered those with camouflage abilities to use them immediately. The players quickly reacted, scattering in search of hiding spots. As soon as they began to run, the monster jumped off the roof and started to chase them. However, before it could get closer, a second creature appeared out of nowhere, grabbing the first monster with brutal force. The captured creature let out a shrill scream as it was crushed in the grip of the larger predator, then violently thrown out of the building. The new threat did not hesitate and began running after the group. One of the players, upon hearing sounds from behind, instinctively turned to check. His eyes widened as he saw a colossal monster in pursuit. Recognizing the creature, he shouted to the president of the Nova Order, alerting him. A man-eating leopard was hunting them. What should have been a simple entry into the uncontrolled zone had turned into a disaster. Blazing Fire, maintaining his cool, warned them not to panic. He ordered them to continue trying to avoid direct confrontation as much as possible. The group ran into a narrow alley, attempting to outmaneuver the creature. Wu Ji, intrigued, asked about the true strength of the monster. In response, one of the guild members explained that on a previous occasion, 10 squads had been sent into the uncontrolled zone to gather information. 5 of those groups were annihilated by a single beast of the species. Despite such alarming information, Wu Ji remained skeptical. The creature, on the other hand, seemed to have understood the escape route of the group. Instead of following them directly, it took a shortcut by tearing through a building wall. It then appeared before the players at the end of the alley. Blazing Fire, without hesitation, called out to one of the team members, a blindfolded man, and ordered him to distract the monster. The player immediately stopped and complied with the order, activating his taunt ability. The effect would last for 1 minute, reducing the speed of the leopard by 10% but increasing its attack power. As soon as the ability took effect, the monster abruptly halted its charge. It focused its attention on the new target. The player then ran in the opposite direction of the group, drawing the creature with him. Wu Ji observed the scene closely, reflecting on what could be gained from the situation. Then he shifted his gaze to Liu Yi, his expression growing even more serious. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and activated his marking ability on him. From that moment on, Liu Yi would be within the perception range of all creatures within a radius of 1,000 meters. The effect would last exactly 10 minutes. As soon as the ability was activated, all the monsters in the area immediately turned their attention to Liu Yi. The man-eating leopard, which had been distracted by the blind player, suddenly stopped. The player cursed, confused, and exclaimed why the creature had stopped following him. Meanwhile, Liu Yi continued running, unaware of anything unusual. However, a monster suddenly jumped at him. With no time to react, he tried to grab it, but the force of the charge caused him to lose control. The beast threw him brutally against a wall. The impact was violent. The other players, noticing the movement, stopped and looked back. At the sight, they exclaimed in shock. Monsters were coming from all directions, converging directly on Liu Yi. Confusion overtook the group. They did not understand why. Suddenly, all the creatures were focused on him. It was then that Liu Yi shone with fire, and his gaze met Wu Ji. A smile on the face of the player revealed his intentions. Liu Yi immediately understood what had happened. Without hesitation, Blazing Fire sprinted toward Liu Yi. He ordered the others to return to the original shelter and said he would try to rescue him. The team members called out to him, confused by his decision. As he ran, Wu Ji observed him and thought that he was completely insane. At this pace, he would not return alive. He told the others that Blazing Fire seemed determined, but now Liu Yi had become a burden to the team. One of the players wanted to protest, but his attention was diverted by the sound of buildings collapsing. The man-eating leopard was back. It seemed to have shaken off the taunt effect. With no other choice, the rest of the group decided to return to the shelter. Meanwhile, Blazing Fire continued running toward Liu Yi. At the same time, he monitored his health bar. He ordered him not to think about dying there. Suddenly, a monster jumped from one side. Blazing Fire noticed the attack and quickly drew his sword. With a swift strike, he tried to cut the creature's chest. However, the attack didn't even scratch the beast's skin. He was surprised to realize how resistant the monster's defenses were. The creature retaliated with a violent swipe of its claws. Blazing Fire gritted his teeth and blocked the attack, but he was forced to retreat. He pulled back, observing the monsters crowding around Liu Yi. The number of enemies was overwhelming. For a moment he thought he wouldn't be able to save him, but then something caught his attention. Among the stiffened bodies of the beasts, he noticed that Liu Yi was still resisting. The monsters were holding him by the arms and legs, but he wasn't giving in. Liu Yi activated his freezing ability on himself. The system immediately notified that the cognition power was not being consumed at that moment. His health points were 5,036 out of a total of 8,040. Only 10 seconds remained before the freedom status expired. Without hesitation, Liu Yi activated the blessing ability. He spent all of his knowledge, power points, and increased his attributes by 146. His stats exceeded 1,000 points, and in some cases they reached over 6,000. The blessing spread through his body, dissipating the effect of the mark. He clenched his fist around the handle of his katana. The system notified that his energy had risen to 2,712 points, and that his attack power increased by 50%. With a swift motion, Liu Yi swung his blade. All the monsters around him were cut down in a single strike. At the same time, the man-eating leopard advanced. The creature passed by blazing fire, knocking down walls in its path. Liu Yi noticed its approach in time. He grabbed the beast's claw at the last second, trying to contain it. The impact caused his feet to slide along the ground. He resisted. Quickly changing his strategy, Liu Yi switched his katana for a pendulum gun. He used the stunning effect and aimed the weapon at the monster's head. The moment the creature prepared to attack him, he pulled the trigger. The shot hit dead on. Taking advantage of the opening, he switched to a conventional model and began firing non-stop. The bullets repeatedly struck the leopard's body. Finally, the creature gave way. With a loud crash, a monster fell to the ground unconscious. Liu Yi climbed onto the beast's corpse and looked around with confidence. Under his feet, the leopard's body began to disappear. Blazing Fire, motionless, watched everything in shock. His voice trembled as he muttered that Liu Yi was a liar. After all, how could a support player possess such strength? The system notified that only 50 seconds remained until the blessing effect ended. Liu Yi immediately ran toward the president, who was still confused. Without wasting time, he said they needed to leave. Then he continued running. Blazing Fire, noticing a group of monsters ahead, snapped out of his shock and chased after him. While following, he shouted for Liu Yi to wait for him. At the shelter, the rest of the team remained at the entrance of the dungeon taking cover. One of the members commented that he had no idea what was going on with their president. He wasn't even sending messages, possibly afraid of not getting a response. Another player agreed with this observation. Wuji, intrigued, asked why they didn't just go back. After all, which player could survive under these conditions? One of the men responded that the president and Liu Yi were still alive. If their health bars hadn't decreased, it was because they were using abilities that temporarily block damage. However, Liu Yi seemed particularly unlucky. No one knew exactly what had happened, but for some reason he had attracted a large number of monsters, from which escape was impossible. This was a real problem. After saying this, the man crossed his arms and gritted his teeth in frustration. Suddenly, one of the comrades exclaimed. They had appeared on the map not far from the shelter. Wuji was surprised by the news. The others in turn became excited. Eager, he warned the group that the two might bring monsters with them. He ordered everyone to prepare to defend the shelter. The team members positioned themselves at the entrance, weapons in hand. One of them commented that he didn't hear any loud sounds approaching. Shortly after, the guild president entered the shelter alongside Liu Yi. The group, relieved, celebrated the return of the two. The only exception was Wuji. He watched them with a serious expression. In his mind, that president was a major problem. Meanwhile, the players began praising Blazing Fire. They said he was incredible, that he managed to handle an extremely difficult situation and still save Liu Yi. They stated that he truly deserved his title. Blazing Fire, however, remained silent. His gaze, fixed on the back of Liu Yi, revealed something different. After the two moved away from the group and walked to the back of the shelter, they sat on concrete blocks. It was then that the president finally broke the silence. He said that all those pleasantries were unnecessary. They needed to rest for a bit and then head for the dungeon. The players agreed with him and became excited. Meanwhile, Wuji observed Liu Yi, who remained serious. Intrigued, he approached and sat next to him. With a smile, he asked how Liu Yi had managed to escape. He thought it had been quite an exciting adventure. Liu Yi looked away, and for a moment remembered when the system dispelled the mark ability. Without hesitation, he replied that Wuji knew very well the reason, since it was his doing. Wuji shuddered at hearing those words. Nervously, he waved his hand and asked, trying to disguise it, what Liu Yi meant by that. Liu Yi kept his gaze steady and said he found it strange that Wuji didn't know. He explained that the blessing was an ability capable of removing any negative effect, including the mark that had been placed on him. Wuji's eyes widened in surprise. Liu Yi continued, stating that the mark was a level 40 ability. Only 2 people there were capable of using it. Silence hung between the two of them. Liu Yi drew a weapon. With a cold expression, he revealed that from the moment he entered, he had already considered ending Wuji. However, upon talking to him, he realized something. Wuji's indecision wasn't from fear, but from his determination. He slowly stood up and pointed the weapon directly at Wuji. With a firm voice, he said that there was only one way to resolve this. Wuji stood still in silence. He exclaimed, loudly surprised by what was happening. To him, this was absurd. They were allies, not enemies. The rest of the team remained alert, watching the conflict unfold, not fully understanding the situation. Meanwhile, Wuji wore a cynical smile. He found it ironic that Liu Yi was about to kill him with a weapon like something out of a movie. To him, this scene only reinforced the need to isolate Liu Yi from the team. Moreover, if the mark ability was level 40 and only 2 people could use it, then Liu Yi was sure that Wu Ji was the one responsible for activating it. One of the players, outraged, shouted at Liu Yi, questioning his actions. However, Blazing Fire remained seated, not intervening. Liu Yi simply observed with a slight smile on his face. Wu Ji, still trying to defend himself, pounded his chest and said that he had only asked how Liu Yi escaped the monsters and suddenly had a weapon pointed at him. His expression showed indignation as he turned to the president seeking support. He wanted to know if this was really acceptable within the team. Blazing Fire remained silent. Wu Ji insisted, pointing out that Liu Yi probably wanted to kill him just for being another support fighter. If that happened, he would be the only one with that power. Wu Ji feared that Liu Yi would start imposing his own conditions, and that the president would eventually give in to them to cross the dungeon. To him, this was all wrong. He then looked at the others and demanded their attention. He wanted everyone to realize that Liu Yi was a dead weight and had no right to remain in the team. Liu Yi, for his part, continued to observe calmly. To him, the situation was clear. Wu Ji was the real culprit behind all of this. Turning back to the president, Wu Ji insisted that he needed to be replaced. One of the team members tried to intervene, suggesting that they leave the discussion for later when they were safe. However, Blazing Fire stood up to place his hand on the player's shoulder, stopping him. His gesture indicated that the conflict needed to be resolved right there. Wu Ji became even more anxious. To him, Blazing Fire was completely mistaken. It was then that the president moved forward and firmly grabbed Liu Yi's weapon, forcing him to release it. His gaze was full of disapproval as he stared at Wu Ji, demanding an explanation. For a moment, Wu Ji hesitated, unsure how to react. Still confused, he felt the sudden pressure on his neck. The president had grabbed him tightly. The question came harshly. Why was he constantly trying to create disharmony among the team members? The tight grip made it hard for him to breathe. And Wu Ji wondered where the president got so much strength. Trying to catch his breath, he gritted his teeth and asked what exactly was happening. Blazing Fire, without releasing his hold on his throat, confidently stated that he trusted Liu Yi far more than Wu Ji could imagine. Wu Ji, still in disbelief, argued that he didn't understand the situation. After all, it was Liu Yi who had pointed the weapon first, but his justification was ignored. The president then activated his ability. His voice was firm as he stated that Liu Yi would never have done that without reason. Shock overtook Wu Ji. He couldn't believe the president trusted Liu Yi so much that he disregarded his words. To him, this was unfair. He hadn't done anything wrong. But before he could say anything else, the Shadow Blood Shell ability was activated. A thick red liquid enveloped him, completely trapping him inside the bloody shell. His body was sealed and his life began to drain gradually. He tried to activate a recovery ability, but he realized in desperation that he was completely blocked. As his health drained away, Wu Ji started to panic. Staggering, he tried to approach Liu Yi, and in a last desperate act grabbed his throat. His eyes were filled with terror, his breathing uneven. Then suddenly his body went still. The last breath escaped his lungs. Without strength, he collapsed to his knees. His health reached 0. In an instant, he disappeared. The bloody shell dissipated, spreading across the ground before returning to Blazing Fire. Liu Yi, who had watched everything, finally broke the silence, calling for his companion. Then he sat down and murmured a thank you, smiling faintly. His mind revisited the moments when he faced all those monsters alone. An unsettling thought crossed his mind. If he hadn't done that, perhaps he would have been forced to kill all his teammates. After a few moments of silence, Blazing Fire turned to Liu Yi. With a serious look, he made an unexpected proposal. He wanted Liu Yi to join the New Order. Then he completed his statement with a promise. Within the guild, he would have the highest position. Blazing Fire apologized for having killed Wu Ji earlier. He was aware of the contradictions within the New Order's members, but he believed that recruiting a strong player like Liu Yi would allow them to overlook past conflicts. The guild members were surprised by the president's request. He had never shown such hesitation when inviting someone to the New Order before. Moreover, he was offering exceptional conditions, something unprecedented. One of the players commented that all the guild members had gone through various stages of selection. He didn't understand what made Liu Yi so special to deserve a direct invitation. Liu Yi, on the other hand, asked an unexpected question. What was the cost? Blazing Fire showed surprise at the question. Before he could answer, one of the players intervened, questioning the absurdity of such a question. To him, it was more logical for Liu Yi to first understand the benefits before thinking about the costs. However, Liu Yi explained that when joining a guild, one should not only consider the positives. The most important thing was to understand the price to pay. The guild president maintained a confident gaze at Liu Yi. Then he lowered his head and smiled. He said that Liu Yi wouldn't have to pay anything. However, Liu Yi didn't believe the answer. He knew that when the bill came, he would hardly be willing to accept it. The true price was the willingness to sacrifice everything when the guild needed it, including unlimited levels and valuable equipment. In exchange, he would receive a generous compensation. Liu Yi frowned and looked at him with distrust. To him, crossing the dungeon of the uncontrolled zone would inevitably result in a massacre. His words had an immediate impact. The president and the guild members became alert. After a few moments of hesitation, Blazing Fire nervously responded that he didn't believe in such an outcome. He stated that the probability was minimal. Liu Yi, however, didn't seem convinced. He said that many promises had been made without any guarantee of fulfillment. Blazing Fire remained silent, observing him closely. Liu Yi continued stating that he was willing to form an alliance, but would never give up his equipment or his level. Moreover, he would never play with anyone after that dungeon. The players considered his words an affront. To them, Liu Yi had no understanding of the magnitude of that offer. The annual compensation of guild members exceeded 2 million. The only price to pay was to give up one's own equipment during the game. In their view, Liu Yi could only be a fool or a lunatic. Blazing Fire, however, simply sat on a concrete block and sighed. He recognized that it was a shame to lose such a promising player, but he also understood that not everything revolved around the New Order. The Syndicate was still a viable option. Liu Yi smiled and thanked him for his understanding. While observing Blazing Fire's calm expression, his thoughts drifted to the past. If he hadn't lived through so much stress and understood the true importance of equipment and levels for survival, maybe his decision would have been different. With his current strength, even the president of the New Order was personally inviting him to join the guild. For many, that would be a great opportunity. Looking down, Liu Yi reflected on this possibility. For a moment, he felt a slight regret for rejecting the offer. However, he soon brushed those thoughts away. With a discreet smile, he reminded himself that there was no need to apologize. The only reason the president wanted to recruit him was for his strength. If he continued to grow and stay alive, more and more people would seek him out. Meanwhile, Blazing Fire watched the chat window with a grim expression. In the chat, a player named Behu wished everyone good luck. He wrote that the first dungeon of the Uncontrolled zone would be special. It would have 10% of the computational power of the membrane. After a few moments, he added that one of the conditions to perfectly complete a special dungeon was to face a desperate situation. He also mentioned that he had completely failed in the last attempt. Not only had he not passed, but all his allies had died. Now he didn't even know how long it would take to recruit new members. Reading this message, the president gritted his teeth. He mentally cursed, reflecting on the implications of that information. If one of the conditions for passing really involved a desperate situation, then everything could get even more complicated. His gaze shifted to Liu Yi. He thought he had failed in the first step by trying to bribe him, but he knew that his strength was still an essential trump card. He needed to keep insisting. Meanwhile, in the chat, someone commented that they seemed to be on the move. He stated that the group was heading to an uncontrolled zone in search of the computational power membrane. Bagu added that 50% of that power was available. He said that soon they would see how much each one could take for themselves. Chino intervened, mentioning that both the Chaos Zone and the Danger Zone also had 10% of this power. However, he didn't think it was worth investing in them. Another player reinforced this idea, explaining that the cost-benefit ratio was better in the Uncontrolled Zone. There you could obtain 10% of the computational power at once. In the Danger Zone and the Chaos Zone, only 1% could be acquired per attempt, though the difficulty level was the same. Swanshu suggested sending players who could handle the situation in the best possible way. This information made the president reflect. Maybe it would be better to recruit a player who knew how to work well with a team like Strikes. If a massacre really did occur, and Liu Yi refused to cooperate, he would have to resort to Strikes to eliminate him. Deep down, he hoped things wouldn't come to that point. After that, they continued their journey. Liu Yi reflected on temporarily joining the New Order's team. He would have the opportunity to witness the full strength of the guild in action. This way, the attack on the dungeons of the Uncontrolled Zone could begin. The team consisted of a central tank, a player known as Fresh Meat Fan, and a support tank. He was the president of the New Order himself. There was also a support fighter who never removed his blindfold, and a damage dealer who wielded twin swords with lethal precision. Furthermore, a damage collection specialist eliminated monsters stealthily. They played a crucial role in the team. With impeccable coordination, the group took only 4 hours to clear a level 50 dungeon. As they delved deeper into the Uncontrolled Zone, the number of dungeons cleared increased. On the 4th day, the group had completed 12 dungeons. It was then that Liu Yi reached level 50. The achievement brought satisfaction, especially because upon reaching this level, he unlocked the special skill level 50 rebirth power. Before him, 2 skills were available for selection, cooldown, reset, and scan. The first skill allowed the reset of the cooldown for all other skills, but it had a 12-hour cooldown. The second skill allowed scanning the map of the area within a 1,000-meter radius, identifying resources, living creatures, and nearby players. However, every hour 100 cognition points were consumed, 10 points per second. This skill had no cooldown, and every 10 levels, the scan radius increased by 100 meters. On the third day in the uncontrolled zone, Liu Yi had reached level 50. On the sixth day, the team finally found what the guild president had been searching for. Upon spotting the portal to the special dungeon of the uncontrolled zone, Blazing Fire couldn't contain his joy. Soon after, a new player appeared to replace Wuji, who had died previously. Before that, the guild president had to temporarily invite a second-tier member to fill the spot. Meanwhile, Strikes was running through the narrow streets between ruined buildings. With a precise jump, he propelled himself off the ground and landed on top of a building where a team was waiting for him at the entrance of the dungeon. He paused for a moment and looked around. Currently at level 56, it was clear that his presence energized the team members. As soon as he arrived, everyone expressed relief. Strikes smiled and gave a thumbs up before teasing them. He said that he had already warned those brainless chickens not to move ahead without him. The smiles of the players immediately disappeared. For a few seconds, no one said anything until one of them retorted, reminding him that the same rule applied to him. Strikes just laughed, then waved at the guild president and cleared his throat, trying to mask his embarrassment. He said no one had informed him about the situation. Blazing Fire remained silent, giving him a tired look. Liu Yi, who had been observing the scene closely, analyzed the newcomer. He recognized that this was Strikes, one of the 5 best players in Met World before his reincarnation. Moreover, he had already defeated a copy of Strike in the Mirror Realm. However, he was not sure just how strong he was compared to his real version. While Liu Yi pondered, Strike finally turned his attention to one of the team members. He approached the support player and stopped beside him. Strike then asked if he was the so-called Liu Yi. The player looked at him and smiled. He said that the guild president had mentioned that he was strong enough to be compared to the little toe of Strike. Upon hearing this, Blazing Fire and the other team members became visibly tense. Liu Yi frowned. If Strike was comparing him to a little toe, then maybe it would be necessary to tear it off. He just hoped he would not have to pay with his own life. Blazing Fire interrupted the conversation, scolding Strike. He asked him to stop talking nonsense. Strike, for his part, apologized to Liu Yi. He explained that he had the habit of saying impulsive things, but that his temperament was not bad. He then looked at the guild president and added that if Liu Yi was truly as strong as his little toe, then that was a good thing. Before he could say anything further, Blazing Fire raised a finger and ordered the others to take him to the dungeon. The players grabbed Strike and dragged him to the portal. They said that since he was so powerful, he should go first and prove his words in practice. Strike protested, stating that he was not like them and did not need to be pushed. Blazing Fire watched the team depart inside. He wondered how he had managed to get that man into the guild. Now alone with Liu Yi, he turned his attention back to the dungeon entrance. Before them stood the portal to the long-awaited special dungeon of the Uncontrolled Zone. To calm his excitement, Blazing Fire took a deep breath before turning to Liu Yi. He told him that the true goal of the new order in this area was this dungeon. No matter what happened during the raid, the guild would be in debt to Liu Yi. Liu Yi was surprised by this declaration. It only increased his curiosity. What exactly was the guild president looking for inside this special dungeon? Blazing Fire, without taking his eyes off the portal, exuded confidence. After a moment, he took a few steps forward and ordered Liu Yi to follow him. Before entering the dungeon, Liu Yi reflected on his situation. In his previous life, he never had the chance to communicate directly with the president of the new order. As a low-level player at the time, all he knew were rumors. Stories described the guild leader as a ruthless man, indifferent to the lives of others. However, after spending several days under his leadership, Liu Yi began to realize something. The reality was more complex than he had imagined. For a brief moment, he considered the possibility that they could become friends, but he quickly dismissed the thought. True friendships only emerged between those with similar interests, and what he felt now was nothing more than a reflection of the temporary pleasure of teamwork. Deep down, he knew that if a conflict arose between him and the new order, there would be no room for camaraderie. The only person he could trust was his sister. If circumstances forced them to be on opposing sides, he would have to accept the guild as his enemy and fight with everything he had to survive. With this resolution in mind, he crossed the portal. The moment he did, the environment around him abruptly changed. The scene unfolding before him was not real. It was a memory embedded in the location. 2 figures watched with satisfaction as something moved inside an incubation chamber. The creature had successfully been born. After removing it from the incubator, the scientists confined it to a secluded room to monitor its growth. One of them excitedly commented on the success of the experiment, praising the power of technology. The director of the research institute, satisfied with the progress, inquired about the brainwashing process applied to the creature. The response was not encouraging. All the methods tested so far had only served to make the creature even more agitated. Suddenly, without warning, the creature began to move at an alarming speed. Before the scientist could react, the monster broke the containment glass and charged toward the director. Among the scattered fragments on the floor, its reflection revealed a terrifying image. In the chaos, one of the scientists, badly injured, crawled to a table. With the little strength he had left, he warned the others to prevent the escape of the creature. The director, overwhelmed with fear, made a desperate decision. He stood up abruptly and with a shout full of urgency declared that they needed to destroy it. He then pressed a large red button. The scene shifted once again, bringing Liu Yi and the rest of the team back to reality. Now they were standing atop a mountain facing the entrance to the research institute. The group paused for a moment, analyzing the location. Liu Yi recognized the familiar pattern. Another special dungeon with cutscenes integrated into the narrative. While observing blazing fire, reviewed the information the system provided about the mission. The interface confirmed that the dungeon mission had been generated and that teleportation was disabled. Mission: an experiment gone out of control. The objective was to transport the life source of the screaming serpent to membrane number 304, located at the core of the research institute for the incubation of ancient organisms. However, the mission had strict rules. The life source could not be removed from the player's inventory. Their lives were directly connected to the item. Anyone who broke the bottle would die immediately. In a matter of seconds, each player saw a bottle materialize in their hands. Blazing Fire assessed the situation and concluded that everyone had received the life source. In order for them to succeed, the ideal would be to reach their destination without any casualties. Taking a deep breath, the guild leader indicated that it was time to move forward. Liu Yi gripped the bottle firmly, examining it carefully. Until that moment, he had only participated in 2 dungeons with cutscenes, one of them during a special mission alongside YXC. As the group prepared to move ahead, no one noticed the presence hovering above them. High above, a shadow moved silently, watching every step they took. The calm was broken by a deafening scream. A colossal serpent suddenly appeared, its voice reverberating across the mountain. The group immediately turned around, feeling a chill run through their bodies as they faced the creature. Blazing Fire reacted quickly, attempting to coordinate the players. He instructed them to form a combat formation. However, before they could react, the serpent released a second scream, this time unleashing a powerful sound wave. The impact was devastating. Several players fell to their knees. They dropped their bottles to the ground while clutching their ears in agony. The moment the glass of the bottles shattered on the floor, the bodies of their bearers began to dissolve rapidly. The system soon announced the tragic result. 3 team members had died. Observing the fragments scattered on the ground, his gaze hardened. He realized that they had lost 3 bottles. The system notified Liu Yi of the condition that had been imposed on him. Watching the creature closely, he noticed that Strikes was already moving toward it. The warrior seemed determined to face the serpent on his own. He ignored any caution. The team, noticing his impulsive movement, reacted with concern. After losing 3 members, no one wanted to witness another death. Strikes showed no hesitation and charged toward the monster with impressive speed. His intention was clear. He wanted to avenge the companions who had perished. The impact of his strike was powerful. To his surprise, the blade caused no visible damage to the serpent. Before he could react, the creature opened its enormous mouth. In a quick and precise movement, it swallowed him whole. The rest of the team watched the scene in shock. Some had already expected a similar outcome. Others were speechless at the speed with which they had lost yet another member. Showing no further interest in the remaining players, the serpent retreated and disappeared into the forest. It was then that a detail caught the attention of the guild leader. The liquid inside the bottles of the deceased players began to distribute among the remaining bottles. He quickly understood what this meant. To complete the mission flawlessly, it wasn't necessary for everyone to reach the destination, only for the 10 parts of the life source to be delivered. Meanwhile, some players continued to discuss Strikes. The possibility that he was still alive was raised. Upon checking the team list, they confirmed that his name remained active. This indicated that he was still inside the serpent. Perhaps there was a way to rescue him. Faced with the uncertainty of how to deal with the monster, some team members began discussing strategies. The guild leader quickly ended the conversation. He seemed confident that if Strikes had survived up to that point, he still had a chance to escape. The most important thing at that moment was to head to the research institute and complete the mission. Liu Yi analyzed the situation carefully. The guild leader's actions reinforced his suspicions that he was seeking a perfect execution of the dungeon. The memory of when he himself had received 1% computational power for a flawless move came to mind. He began to question whether Blazing Fire was after the same benefit. With no other option, the group continued their journey. They maintained a fast pace toward the institute. 20 minutes later, as they neared the destination, one of the players checked the team's map. He made a concerning discovery. Strikes was on the move. He was moving at an abnormal speed. At first, they thought he might be running to catch up with them, but soon they realized something was wrong. The conclusion came almost immediately. It wasn't Strike who was moving, but rather the creature that had swallowed him. The warning came too late. Suddenly, one of the players noticed movement in the nearby bushes. He alerted the guild leader. Blazing Fire halted his steps immediately. He turned just in time to see a screaming serpent emerging from the vegetation. Its mouth was wide open, ready to strike. Reacting with speed, he activated the Blood Shadow skill. He dodged the attack at the last moment. Once he repositioned himself, he quickly assessed the situation. He ordered the players to take their combat positions. At the same time, he instructed that Strike attack the creature from the inside in case he was still alive. The serpent, sensing the movement around it, redirected its attention to the players. The players decided to attack the serpent together. As they advanced, they struck blows against the monster, but their attacks didn't seem to have any effect. The creature, seemingly impenetrable, remained unscathed. Suddenly, the snake violently swung its tail. Several players were thrown to the sides, hitting the ground with force. They quickly recovered, restoring their health. Meanwhile, one of the fighters used a whip to strike the creature's face. He was trying to distract it while using a provocation skill, moving from side to side. Without hesitation, he ran in the opposite direction of the others, quickly passing by the guild leader, who was waiting for a chance to face the monster. The serpent then let out a deafening roar. Sound waves spread across the battlefield. One of the players didn't have time to react. His bottle shattered immediately. In an instant, his body began to disintegrate. Terrified, he realized that his death was inevitable. The rest of the group shouted his name, but nothing could be done. Blazing Fire and Liu Yi silently observed the spot where their teammate had been just seconds before. The impact of the loss was evident. Another team member, still shaken, brought news about Strike. The player trapped inside the serpent reported that its internal defense was incredibly resistant. He couldn't harm it from within. Blazing Fire turned his gaze back to the opposing creature. Up close, he noticed a peculiar detail. The structure of the monster resembled an insect more than a snake. This explained its abnormal resistance. Liu Yi quickly realized the greatest danger of the situation. Since the bottles couldn't be stored in the inventory, the serpent simply destroyed them with its sound waves. Each strike was a direct threat to everyone's lives. The tension increased. The possibility that nearly the entire team could perish at the beginning of the dungeon seemed real. Silence filled the air for a moment. Without warning, the screaming serpent began to move again. To everyone's surprise, it turned around and disappeared into the forest. The players were confused. Why would the creature leave them alive after eliminating two of them? As they tried to find an explanation, they noticed that the liquid from the shattered bottle had been redistributed among the remaining vials. The tone of the fluid had become brighter. Blazing Fire analyzed the situation and began to form a hypothesis. The monster wasn't just attacking randomly, it was somehow testing them. If the perfect passage was truly the guild leader's goal, Liu Yi pondered what would be necessary to achieve it. Killing the serpent might not be the way. The real objective could be to connect all the remaining life sources. Blazing Fire ordered everyone to stay alert. Now that the monster had moved away, they had a chance to reach the research institute. Without wasting time, they set off. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a huge building. There was a large hole in the wall, indicating that something had escaped from there. One of the players checked the map and alerted the guild leader. The serpent was still nearby. Blazing Fire quickly assessed the situation. To buy time, he made a drastic decision. He ordered one of the players to break their own bottle. The chosen player hesitated, surprised by the command. Another player intervened, arguing that they couldn't afford to lose anyone else. Blazing Fire, however, was firm. With a large number of players defeating, the creature would be impossible. What they needed now was speed, not brute force. If they couldn't drive the serpent away, they wouldn't have time to explore the institute. Faced with the imposed decision, the player gritted his teeth and broke his bottle. The system notified the death of another team member. As soon as the bottle was shattered, the screaming serpent immediately turned in the opposite direction. The strategy had worked. They had distracted the monster. The players continued on their path, relieved. One of them, excited, praised the brilliance of the plan. Another said they should thank the captain. Thanks to him, they now had a way to track the movements of the dungeon boss. Blazing Fire checked the map and confirmed his theory. Meanwhile, Liu Yi began to reflect. Earlier, he had refused to spend money on equipment and levels. Now, if Blazing Fire knew how to get perfect passage, he could become a target as soon as they reached the institute. In that kind of environment, surrounding him would be easy. Blazing Fire ordered them to hurry. The entrance to the institute was now in sight. The group ran through the clearing that led to the building. Reaching the stairs, they quickly advanced toward the entrance. Liu Yi, however, suddenly stopped. A thought crossed his mind. He couldn't allow them to surround him inside. The other players noticed his hesitation. They stopped at the top of the stairs and asked what was happening. Without looking away, Liu Yi turned to Blazing Fire. He asked a single question. What was the easiest way to finish this mission? Everyone listened but said nothing, thinking that he should prepare for a battle against them. The president furrowed his brow and walked to the edge of the stairs. With a serious tone, he stated that Liu Yi was mistaken. The level of this dungeon was extremely high, and he had no intention of harming him. His only goal was to complete the mission. If Liu Yi didn't trust him, he could wait outside while the three of them completed the task. Despite the unknown dangers inside the institute, the threat from the serpent outside was far greater. Liu Yi remained silent, evaluating the situation. One of the players called out to him, questioning his hesitation. He wanted to know what made Liu Yi distrust the president. He thought it was an absurd joke. Another player agreed, reminding that they had cooperated for a long time. There was no reason to doubt now. Did Liu Yi really think the president should treat him like a brother? Liu Yi furrowed his brow, weighing his options discreetly. He glanced at the map. According to the calculations, strikes would arrive in about 10 minutes. The serpent attacked every 20 minutes, meaning the next attack would happen in 13 minutes. If he wanted to act, he had to do so before the president met with strikes. Blazing Fire turned toward the entrance, and with a calm smile stated that no one would be forced into anything. They just needed to complete the mission. With that, he entered the institute. The other players, irritated, insulted Liu Yi. They called him a traitor and said they couldn't trust him at such a crucial moment. They would proceed without him. Liu Yi drew his katana and assessed his chances. The freezing status lasted 10 seconds. The blessing remained active for 60. Considering strikes, 4 opponents had significant combat power. If he used freezing along with the blessing, he would have a chance to defeat them. If he made a mistake, he would lose his alliance with the New Order Guild. If he hesitated, all his efforts would be wasted. Blazing Fire noticed his indecision and turned around, furrowing his brow. The guild members questioned Liu Yi with disdain. Did he really intend to attack them? Besides the alliance, his life was already practically lost. They wouldn't dirty their hands to kill him. Liu Yi felt that the answer was clear. Without hesitation, he activated the freezing status and the blessing. His strength and speed increased dramatically. In an instant, he shot toward the guild president, who activated a skill. Blazing Fire's body disappeared before his eyes. The players shouted incredulously at Liu Yi's decision. They claimed he was making a grave mistake and wouldn't last long. Before they could react, Liu Yi swung his katana and cut one of the players in half. The victim's body fell to the ground. Before disappearing, the player murmured, stunned, that it wasn't possible. The system notified the death of a team member. Another player charged forward furiously, moving back and forth in an attempt to deceive him. Liu Yi waited for the right moment. He firmed his grip on the weapon, advanced, and delivered a precise strike. The system once again notified the death of a team member. Liu Yi checked the map. Blazing Fire was still in the same spot. Strikes, however, was getting closer. Liu Yi gathered all his strength and attacked with ferocity, breaking part of the building's side. Debris fell all around. Looking around, he checked the president's health bar. His HP was still full. This meant that despite the impact, he hadn't managed to hit him. He checked the map once more. Blazing Fire was still there, but there were no signs of him among the debris. What skill was that? Liu Yi then realized strikes was very close. The system notified that the freezing status had expired. Looking at the debris in front of him, Liu Yi yelled out challengingly, calling the president. He asked if he was just a coward, incapable of facing him directly. Blazing Fire remained silent, not revealing himself. The system then notified that the blessing time had also expired. Liu Yi muttered to himself, if Blazing Fire wanted his cowardice to become a habit, he would stay hidden. However, strikes had already arrived. Seconds later, the figure of the player appeared in the clearing. Liu Yi noticed the movement on the map. Blazing Fire had moved toward his ally. Coming out of invisibility, the old president appeared with a malicious smile. He mocked Liu Yi, praising his courage. However, he reminded him that when facing the man eating leopards, Liu Yi had revealed all his trump cards. Blazing Fire stated that in the end he had sacrificed only 2 of his men. Liu Yi didn't even respond, only furrowing his brow. Strikes in turn drew his sword. Without hesitation, he and Blazing Fire advanced together to attack him. Hey everyone, did you enjoy the story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story.